LoveLore Library. Chapter 1378. Okay. Ning Xuemo responded. Her eyes were still in a daze. She seemed to be thinking about something, but at the same time, she didn't seem to be thinking about anything. It was as if a ball of wool had been stirred up in her heart. It was a mess and she couldn't find a clue. She deliberately told herself not to think too much. She helped Shui Lan sit up and said, "Sit properly. I'll treat your injuries." Without any explanation, she sat behind him and pressed her palms on his back. She skillfully treated his injuries. When she channeled her power into her palms and sent her psychokinesis into Shui Lan's body, she seemed to hear these words. To treat this kind of internal injury, you need to use abrupt force. Use 30% of your strength to go through the back. This was what Shinjiuli had taught her before. She used it skillfully every time she treated someone. Now that she was using it again, she couldn't help but think of these words. Her palms trembled. The psychokinesis she sent out almost went into Shui Lan's body. Shui Lan's back stiffened. He said softly, "Momo." Since she had cut off all ties with that person, she didn't want to use the martial arts he taught her. However, if she wanted to use psychokinesis to treat internal injuries, she didn't know how to use anything else. She paused for a moment and pulled back her hand in annoyance. Shui Lan didn't know what she was trying to do. He couldn't help but turn around to look at her. Ning Xuemo took a deep breath and calmed down. She finally remembered that she could use the medical skills she had learned before. Her acupoint healing method was also very effective. She patted Shui Lan's shoulder and said, "Don't be distracted. Sit properly." Shui Lan was speechless. She was the one who was distracted, wasn't she? Ning Xuemo's acupoint healing method was also very good. Although it wasn't as effective as Shinjiuli's method, Shui Lan was able to stand up after a while. Although his legs were still a little wobbly when he walked, at least she didn't have to carry him. Ning Xuemo helped him walk to the main road and hailed a passing carriage. The two of them finally entered the city. After finding an inn, Shui Lan recuperated in the inn for 2 days and finally recovered a little. His body had a good foundation, and he was often injured. Therefore, he had brought some healing elixirs with him. After some treatment, he had recovered about 60 to 70% of his strength. He was thinking about using moonlight iron to forge weapons, so as soon as his body recovered, he dragged Ning Xuemo to the smithy. "What kind of saber do you want to make?" The black-clothed young blacksmith turned the moonlight iron over and looked at it several times. Finally, his gaze fell on Ning Xuemo. His tone wasn't very good. He still recognized her. That year, she came here with a white-clothed man to forge weapons. That white-clothed man's ame piercer was made for her. He still remembered that when the two of them came to take the ame piercer, this girl's eyebrows were almost blooming with joy. She held the ame piercer tightly, as if she was afraid that someone would snatch it away from her. Now, there was actually a red-clothed man who took an even bigger piece of moonlight iron to forge something for her. No wonder she didn't want the ame piercer. It turned out that she had found a better one. The black-clothed young blacksmith's eyes flashed with a trace of injustice. No wonder people said that women were generally fickle. Now it seemed that this was indeed the case. Ning Xuemo was a little absent-minded and didn't hear the black-clothed blacksmith's words. Shui Lan was in a good mood and asked him to bring over various saber designs for Ning Xuemo to choose. Ning Xuemo finally regained her senses. She casually looked at the drawings. Chapter 1379. She suddenly felt a little irritated. "Forget it, let's not forge it for now. Let's wait until I think of something new. Don't waste this piece of iron." She pulled Shui Lan and left without any explanation. Inside a restaurant. The table in the private room was filled with sumptuous dishes and delicious dishes. Ning Xuemo drank a mouthful of wine. The wine was soft and sweet, and was suitable for women to drink. Ning Xuemo didn't want to drink any more after drinking a mouthful. She slammed the table and called the waiter, "Bring your Lai Hui Chun, that wine will taste good." That wine was the strongest wine in the restaurant, and it was also very common. Ning Xuemo had drunk it once and couldn't forget it. Shui Lan frowned. "That wine is only for the general public. If you want to drink strong wine, why don't you order something else? How about Tourmaline Autumn? That wine is spicy enough, and it's suitable for us." Ning Xuemo raised her eyebrows. "I think Lai Hui Chun is better. Didn't you often drink that a few days ago?" Shui Lan was surprised. "That wine has a herbal taste, and I don't like it. I never drink it, and I haven't touched wine recently." Ning Xuemo was surprised, and her heart sank. She looked at him. "You haven't drunk wine recently? Did you drink and forget?" Shui Lan shook his head. "How can that be? I haven't touched wine for more than a month. Even if I want to drink, I'll drink Tourmaline Autumn, not Lai Hui Chun." Ning Xuemo's expression changed slightly. She remembered the wine she smelled on the tree that day. Although it was light, she could distinguish it very clearly. If the person who drank wine on the tree that day wasn't Shui Lan, who could it be? Her heart suddenly tightened. If there was someone else in that place, there was no reason why she couldn't sense it, unless that person's skills were much higher than hers. In this world, there were very few people who were much more powerful than her. She could count them with 5 fingers. Then, that person's identity was almost obvious. Bang! While she was distracted, she exerted force in her fingers and crushed a wine glass. The wine spilled all over her hand. "What's wrong with you?" Shui Lan took her hand and wiped it with a handkerchief. Ning Xuemo shook her head. "Nothing." The air was filled with the aroma of wine. Ning Xuemo's heart floated. She vaguely remembered that when Shinjuli's thunderous fury appeared, there seemed to be a faint smell of wine on his body. It was the smell of that blazing spring. However, the situation was too tense and chaotic at that time, so she didn't notice it. Now, he suddenly remembered. After connecting the two situations, she understood the relationship between the two. Shinjuli was hiding in that tree that day. With his martial arts, if he didn't want her to see it, she wouldn't have seen it no matter what. As it turned out, he didn't attack them the moment he arrived. She vaguely remembered those few days when she felt like she was being peeped at, but no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't find anyone. Now she finally understood that her intuition wasn't wrong. There was indeed someone watching her during those few days. Needless to say, that person was Shinjuli. He was always by her side during those few days. If he wanted to clean up the family, he would have done it long ago, right? Then why was he hiding in the dark? She remembered the expression on Shinjuli's face when he was stabbed by her, and the words he said before he left. "Ning Xuemo, you still choose him in this life. Okay, I'll let you go. You're on your own." Her heartstrings seemed to have been plucked by someone, and her face turned pale. With a crack, the chopsticks in her hand broke into 2 pieces. Chapter 1380. Momo. Shui Lan held her hand. "What's wrong with you?" Ning Xuemo's hand trembled and she quickly withdrew her hand. She was in such a hurry that she knocked over the wine pot on the table. The wine spilled all over the table and dripped down the table. The wine flowed too fast and Ning Xuemo's reaction was a little slow. She couldn't avoid it and the wine flowed all over her clothes. Shui Lan was speechless. He slowly withdrew his hand and paused for a moment. Then, he took out a handkerchief and squatted down to wipe her clean. She was in such a mess today. She had never been so clueless in her life. She felt panicked and bitter as if her period was coming. She wanted to cry and laugh at the same time. Her eyes were hot and her nose was sour. Ning Xuema took a deep breath and suppressed the tumultuous emotions in her heart. She tapped her finger on her dress and the soaked hem of her dress dried instantly. She even smiled freely. Why do I have to use such a stupid method when I have a spell? Shuailan slowly withdrew his handkerchief and stood up. He smiled. You're right. I'm confused. He looked at the messy cups and plates on the table and called the waiter over. He asked him to remove the wine and dishes and replace them with fresh and steaming dishes. Momo, you must be too tired these 2 days. Eat something. You've lost weight recently. Shuailan attentively served her food. Ning Xuema didn't say anything else. She tried her best to calm herself down and return to normal. She ate a few of her favorite dishes. How is it? Shuailan looked at her with a smile. It's not bad. Ning Xuema forced a smile. In fact, she couldn't taste anything. She seemed to be very hungry and ate happily. In a short while, she finished a crystal pork shoulder, a plate of prawns, and a plate of soy sauce chicken. Shuailan was speechless. She ate too much. He didn't say anything else and accompanied her to eat. But his heart slowly sank. She had suffered so much, but deep in her heart, she had not completely given up on Shinjioli, right? She was not behaving as she used to. In the inn. Ning Xuema, if you can hold on, I will marry you. Haven't you always wanted to marry me? Shuaiemo, wake up. If you persist, I won't hold a grudge against you for trying to assassinate me. You can even become my disciple. Ning Xuema, I'm only doing this to get rid of the devil in your body. Come here, I won't kill you. Come here, let me take a look at your injuries. Ning Xuema, don't mess around. I'll explain everything to you slowly. Ning Xuema woke up from her nightmare, drenched in sweat. She dreamed of being thrown into the copper cauldron and being cooked. These days, she appeared calm on the surface, as if she had already forgotten about that injury. It was only at night that the scene that made her soul tremble and wish she was dead would enter her dreams from time to time, becoming a nightmare that she could never wake up from. Every time she had such a dream, she would desperately order herself to wake up. Wake up! In the midst of extreme pain, she would desperately tell herself that it was a dream. Every time, she would struggle bitterly for a long time to get rid of that nightmare and wake up from the sea of bitterness. Then, she would hug herself in the dark night and keep her eyes open until dawn. She had always boasted that her nerves were as thick as a tree, able to withstand any wind and rain. But after coming to this world, she realized that she was also so fragile. She finally realized that she was also a girl. When she was in extreme pain, she also wanted to cry. Chapter 1381. Back then, Yi Qinghuan drowned her and almost destroyed her soul. After she escaped, she was traumatized and was afraid of water for a long time. She worked hard and got rid of that trauma with the help of Yifeng. After that incident, she thought that she had cultivated an indestructible body and that her resistance to abuse had increased by several times. She thought that nothing could torture her or traumatize her anymore. However, she did not expect that the part where Shinjioli threw her into the copper cauldron to be boiled alive would become her nightmare again. At that time, the despair, helplessness, loneliness, anger, fear, and pain would engulf her again in her dreams. She could not get rid of it even if she wanted to. Every time she woke up, she did not dare to think about it again. Her heart would shrink into a ball whenever she thought about it. If she could, she wanted to completely delete this memory from her mind and never remember it again. If she was in the modern world, she would probably go to a psychiatrist. However, she could not do that in this era. She could only endure it by herself. Every time she woke up from a nightmare, she would repeatedly tell herself that it was all in the past and that she should not be afraid anymore. She realized that she was really afraid. She was really afraid. Every time she woke up from a nightmare, her whole body would tremble in fear. She forced herself to pull herself together and to let go completely. Therefore, these days, she never thought about anything related to Shinjuli. Every time his image appeared in her mind, she would quickly slap it back. In this way, she did not even consider the reason why Shinjuli would cook her. Her first reaction when she saw him was the part where he threw her into the copper cauldron. She could not help but be bitter and angry. Everything she did was too extreme. And this time, she woke up from a nightmare again. As usual, she hugged her knees and sat for a while, waiting for those negative emotions to slowly calm down. At first, she refused to think about it. Now, she finally forced herself to endure the discomfort and think about it again. Therefore, the words that Shinjuli said when he was cooking her echoed clearly in her ears for the first time. She clenched her fists so tightly that her fingertips dug into her flesh. She didn't even realize it. Shinjuli. She softly spat out these 3 words in the dark night. This name was like a sharp thorn engraved in her heart that could not be touched. Once touched, her heart would tremble in pain. Are you really doing this for my own good? Boiling me alive was really just an exorcism. Not to take revenge for the past life, not to avenge Wumo. If that's the case, why didn't you tell me beforehand? Why did you lock me up in the frost purgatory for so many days? Why did you disappear with Yunshi for a few days after raping me? In the dark night, everything was silent. Only her low voice trembled in the night. These days, all she could think about was I have to give up, I have to forget, I have to walk out of this. But today, her heart, which had been in complete despair, finally moved a little. She finally began to feel at a loss. She even had the urge to rush to the Sun-Moon sect to find Shinjuli and force him to tell her the truth. She hugged her knees in the night and fell into deep thought. She did not realize that Shuailan had been lying on the roof for a long time. He was lying there for so long that the dew had wet his robe and his eyelashes. The starlight shone into his eyes, but it did not reflect any light. Chapter 1382. The next day, Ning Xuemo woke up with 2 dark circles under her eyes. She looked at herself in the mirror and frowned slightly when she saw her pale face. She closed her eyes and cast a spell on her face. This spell was pretty good. When a faint green light slowly slid across her face, the dark circles under her eyes disappeared. Her skin was flushed, her eyes were watery, and her lips were full. It was more magical than any makeup spell. No matter what, she didn't want others to see her dispirited. Therefore, she dressed herself up beautifully most of the time. This way, she would appear to be in high spirits. She wore a red dress as usual today. The red dress was like fire and it made her skin look even brighter. After she finished tidying up, she was shocked when she opened the door. Shuailan was standing in front of her door and looking at her with a smile. Ning Xuemo raised her head and looked at the sky outside. She then looked at him. You're so early. Morning star was still there and the sky hadn't turned bright yet. You're even earlier than me. Shuailan smiled and held her hand. Let's go. Ning Xuemo subconsciously raised her hand and brushed her hair away. She took the opportunity to avoid his hand. Where are we going? Shuailan's hand slowly fell but he didn't show anything on his face. Do you still want to stroll around Bulow City or do you want to go somewhere else? Let's go somewhere else. Ning Xuemo walked out in large strides. I've strolled around enough here. Alright, we'll do as you say. Shuailan's gaze was gentle. Momo, no matter where you go, I'll accompany you. Happy face, carrot. The road was filled with clouds and the future was boundless. Shuemo, look. Isn't the scenery here different from below? Shuailan and Ning Shuemo stood side by side in the void. The heavenly wind blew on their robes and made them look like tidal waves. Ning Shuemo glanced at her surroundings. There were bright stars all around and they looked like diamonds. There was even a meteorite belt where she was standing. Meteorites of varying heights floated around them. They were like hills, giants, and monsters. This kind of scenery was very similar to looking at the scenery outside from a spaceship, and it was very different from looking at it from the mainland. In the past, when Shinjiuli brought her around to cultivate, they often traveled through different spaces. However, her skills were too low at that time, so she had to be wrapped in a special enchantment before she could pass through these places. However, that special enchantment was milky white, so she couldn't see the scenery outside. She was extremely stifled inside, and couldn't wait to pop her head out to see with him. However, Shinjiuli had told her before that he wanted her to level up quickly. Once she reached level 8, he wouldn't need the wizardry barrier anymore. She had already reached Earth rank level 9 and was on her way to Heaven rank level 1. Unfortunately, Ning Shuemo pursed her lips lightly and pushed the sudden memory back into the depths of her mind. She turned her head and saw Shuailan quietly looking at her. His eyes seemed to be surging with waves. Very beautiful. Ning Shuemo finally spat out these 3 words. She smiled like a flower, making herself look more energetic as she continued to enjoy the scenery around her. Shuailan lifted his sleeve and gently hugged her slender waist. He tentatively lowered his head and kissed her forehead. Then I'll bring you out often in the future, okay? Momo. Shuemo, when I first found this place, I fantasized that one day I would be able to stand side by side with you and watch the stars fall and the sun and moon change. Ning Shuemo's body slightly stiffened. She was about to push him away, but Shuailan just kissed her and gently let her go. Chapter 1383. Ning Shuemo's body stiffened slightly. She wanted to push him away, but Shuailan only kissed her and gently let her go. His eyes were still looking into hers. Momo, what do you think? Come here often in the future. Most likely. Okay. The 2 figures gradually went further and further away. Just as their figures disappeared into the distance, a white-robed figure appeared where they had been standing. The wind blew his clothes, making his figure look somewhat bleak. Shinjiuli looked into the distance. The silhouette of the 2 people walking side by side was like a poison knife, slowly twisting into his heart. It was a clear pain. He lowered his eyes slightly and pulled the corners of his lips. A few days ago, when he was looking for the herbs to make the demon-vanquishing soup, he had also passed by this place. When he saw the beautiful scenery here, his first thought was to bring her here to enjoy the scenery in the future. However, he didn't expect that the one who brought her here to enjoy the scenery would not be him. It was another man. His stomach started to hurt again, as if the wound had opened up again. It was so painful that it made him want to bare his fangs and brandish his claws. He didn't know how long he stood there. It was so long that the 2 figures could no longer be seen, as if they had really walked out of his world. Perhaps, in the future, he wouldn't be in her world anymore. He took a light breath. He, Shinjiuli, had never been a long-winded person. He did things directly and efficiently. Since he had said that he would let go, he shouldn't be entangled here and look for trouble. He slowly turned around. He found a direction opposite to theirs and resolutely left. Shuemo, what are you looking at? Shuailan and Ning Shuemo were currently walking through a meteorite belt. Far in the distance, there was a dark blue planet surrounded by milky white clouds. It was a beautiful sight to behold from where they were. It looked like looking at the Earth from outer space. It actually made Ning Xuema's eyes a little dry, and a trace of homesickness rose in her heart. If she landed on that planet now, would she be able to go home? Would she be able to return to her own era? Back then, after she had transmigrated, she had discussed with Tom about finding an immortal or simply becoming an immortal herself and transmigrating back to her own time. After that, too many things happened, and her desire to go home faded. Now that this thought was born, it spread like a prairie in her heart. She looked at the planet, and the strange feeling in her heart grew stronger, as if something was calling her from there. She couldn't help but fly a few steps forward. Almost at the same time, a huge whirlpool suddenly appeared under her feet. This whirlpool appeared so suddenly that Ning Xuema was not prepared at all. Her body was immediately pulled into the whirlpool and disappeared in the blink of an eye. Momo. Shuailan turned pale with fright. This place was a space-time crevice, and the aura was extremely chaotic. There were many such space-time crevices that allowed people like them to come and go freely. If he wasn't careful, he would fall into one of them and never find his way home again. He shouldn't have let go of her hand. Almost without thinking, he followed suit and jumped down as well. Even if he got lost, he wanted to get lost with her. He would never let her be alone again. Coarse sand and stones covered the entire land, and the fierce wind blew from one end to the other. The turbulent sea raged around the island, setting off waves that were several feet high. The sky was covered with dark clouds, and from time to time, there were flashes of lightning, followed by heavy rain. Chapter 1384. All of this was the scenery that Ning Xuema was currently standing on. It was desolate, cold, and uninhabited. Not long after Ning Xuema landed on the ground, she understood that this place was a dead land. There were no signs of human habitation, nor were there any other living creatures. There wasn't even a single weed. Perhaps it was because of the frequent heavy rain, but the surface of the ground was riddled with holes. The exposed rocks on the ground were carved into all kinds of strange shapes by the rain blades. They stood there silently, looking like they had been through the vicissitudes of life. Ning Xuema stood on a rock. The rain raged around her, but when it was about to fall on her, it bounced off as if it had hit a barrier. It was obvious that there was a rainproof barrier around her. Ning Xuema looked at the sea not far away and saw Shuailan emerging from the turbulent sea. Momo. Shuailan's figure rose and floated to her side. He sized her up from head to toe, and only after confirming that she was all right did he feel relieved. He looked around again and frowned slightly. This place is not a place for people to stay. Shall we leave? Ning Xuema shook her head slightly and only said 3 words, let's wait and see. Then she strode forward. With their current skills, it was easy to leave this dead land. However, when Ning Xuema landed, she had a very strange feeling. It was as if there was something calling out to her in this place, making her heart sink. Shuailan naturally wouldn't disobey her. He walked side by side with her and took a few steps forward. In such a desolate place, there might be some ferocious creatures hiding in the dark. If he moved forward a little, he could protect her from any possible harm. Momo, what do you want to see? Shuailan was a little puzzled. Ning Xuema and he had been running in this broken place for almost 2 hours. Along the way, they saw only stones and stones. There was no other scenery at all. Of course, they didn't encounter any attacks. Besides the 2 of them, there was no other living creature on this planet. This place is a bit strange, Ning Xuema frowned. Lan Shan, don't you have a very strange feeling? Shuailan sensed for a bit, but he only sensed that this place was a land of death and nothing else. This place shouldn't be inhabited, and there shouldn't be any other species. It's not suitable for living. Shuailan said honestly. At the very least, there was no oxygen here. He and Ning Xuema had to rely on spells to maintain their breathing. Ning Xuema paused for a moment. Shui Lan was relatively sensitive to external objects. Since he didn't feel anything, was there something wrong with her sixth sense? Or was she the only one who could feel the calling? Suddenly, an indescribable fear rose in her heart. It seemed that if she continued to explore, a huge secret would surface. What's wrong? Shui Lan held her hand. Her hand was slightly cold, and there seemed to be cold sweat in her palm. Nothing. Ning Xuema took a deep breath and calmed her mind. Let's continue walking. She had reached this point in her life. She was no longer afraid of any big secret that could threaten her. She wasn't even afraid of death. What was there to be afraid of? She had always been a rash person. Since she had decided on something, she would do it without restraint. She once again sprinted forward, and Shui Lan naturally followed her closely. The calling became more and more obvious. It was as if there were stones superimposed on her heart. Her heart became heavier and heavier. Finally, Ning Xuema's footsteps suddenly stopped. Her gaze landed on a cliff in front of her. Chapter 1385. Shui Lan naturally looked over as well, then stiffened. There was actually a coffin suspended in the air above the cliff in front of them. The coffin was black, dark and gloomy without any luster. Hanging there all alone, it gave off a feeling of desolation and vicissitudes. This was a land of death without any living creatures, nor were there any traces of human activity. How could there be such a coffin out of thin air? Who was inside the coffin? Ning Xuema's eyes were also fixed on the coffin. She was already very sure that the indescribable summoning was coming from inside the coffin, causing her heart to tighten. Her hands and feet were somewhat cold, and her legs were stiff. For a moment, she didn't have the courage to rush over. Shui Lan's eyes also fell on the coffin, and his pupils slightly shrank. Soul coffin. The dark coffin, which was made of an unknown material, was actually condensed using an ancient forbidden soul technique. A coffin condensed using this soul technique could ensure that the corpse inside wouldn't rot for 10,000 years. However, this soul technique also had a special characteristic. Although this kind of coffin could preserve the corpse, it could also place a curse on the owner of the corpse inside. The person inside had to endure 1,000 years of wind and rain, and their soul couldn't reincarnate. Even if they did, their fate would be extremely miserable. All kinds of bad luck, all kinds of bad luck, all kinds of bad luck, generally didn't have a good ending. Shui Lan's fingers in his sleeves suddenly trembled slightly. In his impression, there weren't many people who knew this kind of curse technique. It was a secret technique of the demon realm that couldn't be passed on. Moreover, it could only be done by a third-level heaven realm expert. And in the demon realm, there were only 3 people who had reached this level in the past. Himself, Shui Emo, and the demon ancestor. Shui Lan looked at Ning Xuema beside him, and a bad premonition suddenly arose in his heart. She was the reincarnation of Shui Emo, and also had the fate of being a star of calamity, plagued by disasters. Could it be that inside this coffin was the corpse of Shui Emo, whom he had been searching for all these years? In the end, who killed Shui Emo and used this kind of curse technique to seal her here? Who would hate her so much? In the past, after he was sealed, what in the end happened that caused Shui Emo's tragic death? He stared at the coffin, unable to move for a moment. Thousands of thoughts flashed through his mind, and his hands and feet turned cold. He watched as Ning Xuema walked forward step by step as if she was being summoned. He couldn't help but turn pale. He opened his mouth as if he wanted to say something, but no words came out. Perhaps this was the truth that he had painstakingly searched for. But now, his beloved had finally returned to his side. He only wanted to make good use of the present. He didn't want to investigate the truth of the past anymore, if Ning Xuema knew the truth of what happened that year, she was afraid that Shui Lan didn't dare to think about it anymore. That's it. That's it. It was summoning him. Ning Xuema made up her mind and pulled Shui Lan's arm. Lan Shan, let's go up and take a look. She turned her head and saw that Shui Lan's face was unusually pale. His eyes were also staring at the coffin. He seemed to be sad, happy, fearful, and expectant. His white jade-like forehead was dripping with sweat, and his expression was unprecedentedly strange. What's wrong? Ning Xuema was astonished. Shui Lan's arm stiffened, and the expression in his eyes changed intensely. Finally, he focused on Ning Xuema's face. Momo, do you want to change your fate of being a star of calamity? Ning Xuema nodded. Yes. Shui Lan slightly closed his eyes. Good. Then let's go take a look. Chapter 1386. Shui Lan closed his eyes and said, "All right. Let's go take a look." He seemed to have made up his mind. Without any hesitation, he pulled Ning Xuema and flew towards the coffin. The place where the coffin was hung was neither the sky nor the ground. It was right in the middle of a tall mountain peak, on a small platform that protruded out. The coffin occupied the entire platform, and there was no place to stand. Birds would find it difficult to fly over, and monkeys would find it difficult to climb over. Fortunately, the two of them could stand even if they were suspended in the air, so it wasn't a problem for them to climb up. Ning Xuema floated next to the coffin and looked down at it. She felt a little conflicted. There were complicated starry patterns on the coffin lid, and a faint red light flowed through the patterns. It was mysterious and ancient. This coffin wasn't an ordinary coffin. It seemed like something was sealed inside. Could it be that another monster like a Shui Lan was sealed inside? Back then, she had opened Shui Lan's crystal coffin in a fit of excitement. In the end, it was like opening Pandora's box. Countless troubles came pouring out. What about this coffin? She looked at it carefully. The entire coffin seemed to be overflowing with sadness. When Ning Xuema got close to it, she felt extremely depressed. The coffin wasn't transparent, so the two of them couldn't see what was inside. Shui Lan touched the coffin lid, and his face became even paler. His fingers tightened. He wanted to open the coffin lid, but he didn't have the courage to do so. Ning Xuema hesitated for a moment. Subconsciously, she felt that she should open the coffin. Finally, she put her hand on the coffin lid, wanting to see the patterns first. Shui Lan opened his mouth and raised his hand as if to stop her. However, he couldn't raise his hand and put it down. Maybe it was fate. Maybe it was God who arranged for her to come here. Maybe it was to let her regain her true self. Just as Ning Xuema's hand was placed on top of the coffin lid, the incomparably heavy and mysterious coffin lid started to ripple under her hand. The red light from the decorative pattern also revolved around her hand at high speed. My head hurts. He had a splitting headache. Countless things crazily swarmed into her body through her arm. Her face turned pale and she subconsciously wanted to withdraw her hand. However, her fingers seemed to be glued to it and she couldn't lift them no matter how hard she tried. She felt dizzy as countless memory fragments spun madly in her mind. Scenes of the past, scenes of memories played in her mind like a movie. She finally saw Shui Emo again, but this time, she was no longer a spectator, but a true character. It was only at this moment that she suddenly realized that she had once dreamed about Shui Emo. The bitter, spicy, sour, sweet, and salty experiences of Shui Emo swirled in her heart, as if she had personally experienced them. Scenes flashed through his mind. Some were as clear as yesterday, while others were as blurry as clouds. Shui Emo, the daughter of the devil ancestor, and Shui Tong's twin sister. Because only one person could inherit the devil ancestor made the two girls kill each other. In the end, Shui Mo won and became the successor of the devil ancestor. It wasn't until the moment she became the devil ancestor's successor that she finally knew one of the devil ancestor's secrets. The devil ancestor's inheritance was very special. When the devil ancestor's successor cultivated to a certain level, the devil ancestor would give half of his devil chi to her. At that time, the successor could find a man to marry. Chapter 1387. Because of the special devil chi in her body, the man who married her would consume his telekinesis during intercourse with her again and again, and she would absorb it. The man would become weaker and weaker, while she would become stronger and stronger, and her skills would also become higher and higher. As the husband of the devil ancestor's successor, he had to have the awareness of being a male praying mantis. After the devil ancestor's successor became pregnant, the successor's temperament would change greatly. She would completely tear her man apart and swallow him into her belly. Only in this way could she give birth to the next generation of twins and pass down the devil ancestor's legacy. The old devil ancestor would pass down the last half of his power after the birth of the next generation successor, and then disappear between heaven and earth. According to the convention of the devil world, after Shui Mo became the successor, the devil ancestor would choose the strongest man in both the devil world and the devil world to be her husband. Shui Mo was unwilling to accept this fate of being manipulated, but she was powerless to change it. Fortunately, the devil world's talents had withered in those years, and the devil ancestor hadn't chosen a husband for her, which allowed her to breathe a little. Later, she met Shuilan. She knew that Shuilan liked her, but she didn't dare to like him. Shuilan was the only person she could rely on and trust in this icy devil palace. She didn't want him to become her husband and become a sacrifice. Therefore, every time Shuilan expressed his feelings to her openly or secretly, she would casually reject him. She only wanted him to be her friend. Later, in order to save her, Shuilan was seriously injured by Shinjuli's zither, and his life was hanging by a thread. The devil ancestor told her that in order to save Shuilan, she had to obtain the heart blood of a god as a primer within a year. Shui Mo had no other choice. After weighing the pros and cons several times, she deliberately made a ruse and let herself fall into the hands of those she bought in advance. After going through untold hardships, she successfully mixed in with Shinjuli's side. Because of her pestering, Shinjuli's initial indifference to her gradually turned into pampering. And here, she tasted the taste of being pampered and the beauty of love. She also lived like a real girl. She knew how to cry, laugh, act spoiled, and be unreasonable. Only when she was by Shinjuli's side did she feel like she was living under the sun. She no longer felt sad because of the bloody killings that popped up from time to time. Her feelings for Shinjuli were very strange. In the beginning, he was the hidden sunshine in her heart. Later on, he almost killed her only friend, Shuilan. She started to hate him. When she first came to his side, everything she did was just an act for that one purpose. However, she didn't know when she really fell in love with Shinjuli. By the time she realized this, it was already too late. And Shinjuli was really good to her, almost spoiling her to the heavens. The year she spent by his side was the happiest year of her life. She even had the thought of staying by his side for the rest of her life. She began to feel conflicted, hesitant, and uneasy, and the devil ancestor often secretly sent people to contact her, threatening her with Shuilan's life to force her to make a move. Shui Mo, through a series of indirect inquiries and overt and covert inquiries, knew that the lifespan of a god was endless. He couldn't be killed. Even if his heart was dug out, he wouldn't die. At most, he would be seriously injured. Knowing this, Shui Mo finally steeled her heart and decided to make a move. The last chaotic battle between immortals and devils was incited by the devil ancestor. At that time, Ning Xuema was by Shinjuli's side. Chapter 1388. The final battle between the immortals and devils was instigated and provoked by the devil ancestor. Ning Xuema was by Shinjuli's side. Taking advantage of the fierce battle between him and the devil ancestor, she deliberately let herself be captured by the devil ancestor. Taking advantage of the time when Shinjuli came to save her, she stabbed her sword into Shinjuli's chest and finally took the blood from his heart. The moment the blood flowed out, Shui Mo's face paled, and her heart felt like it was being twisted. When Shinjuli unwillingly asked her, "Was everything just an act?" she cruelly answered, "Yes." Because she knew that after she stabbed her sword, it was impossible for them to be together again. That love was like a flower in the water, or the moon in the fog. Once it was scattered, and it was irretrievable. Even if Shinjuli was willing to forgive her in the future, she still didn't want to return to his side. Because she knew the demonic nature of her body, she didn't want to implicate even Shuilan, let alone Shinjuli. After she took the blood from his heart, she didn't hesitate to slap him away. Although it seemed fierce, she still had a sense of propriety. She wouldn't make things worse for him. The place where he was slapped away was also a place where there were many people in the immortal world. She felt that even if he suffered such a serious injury, he should have enough ability to protect himself. Even if a devil soldier or devil general took the opportunity to attack him, they wouldn't succeed. She didn't expect the devil ancestor to attack again. She also didn't expect that Shinjuli didn't use psychokinesis to protect himself at that time. She looked on helplessly as the devil ancestor flew out a highly poisonous knife silk and stabbed into Shinjuli's heart. The purplish-red blood that followed stung her eyes, and her heart felt as if it had been stabbed by a knife. She subconsciously wanted to rush back to check on him, but the devil ancestor's soft rope wrapped around her waist and pulled her into the palanquin. From the palanquin, she finally saw Long Chuan risking his life to save Shinjuli on the battlefield and fleeing far away. In that battle, the demons won a great victory. Meanwhile, Shui Mo was also flattered by the group of devils. She was too lazy to pay attention to them and immediately went to see the devil ancestor. Naturally, she also went to see Shuilan. It wasn't easy for her to get the heart blood of a god. She wanted to personally feed it to Shuilan. What she didn't expect was that when she carefully carried the bottle of heart blood to the demon Alpha's residence, she saw Shuilan, who had completely recovered from his injuries. At that moment, she felt as if she had been struck by lightning. She stood there and watched as Shuilan walked towards her with a smile, unable to react. The blood bottle in her hand was easily taken away by the demon ancestor. In the darkness, she could only hear the greedy swallowing sound. The demon ancestor praised her and said that she was a hero who had eliminated a strong opponent in the demon world. His voice was full of pride. He then told her with a smile that Shuilan had already woken up half a year ago. It was just that his injuries hadn't healed yet and he had been quietly recuperating in the demon palace. In the end, the demon ancestor didn't forget to show off to Shui Mo, look at how good this lord is to you. In order to save this subordinate of yours, this lord spent a lot of effort. This bottle of blood is your compensation to this lord. Now, this lord has given you a lively and healthy him. Are you satisfied? Shui Mo finally understood that all of this was just a trap set up by the demon ancestor. A trap for her to assassinate Shinjuli. At this time, Shui Mo could only grit her teeth and swallow her pride. She woodenly said that she was satisfied and slowly walked out, leaving Shuilan hanging there. She knew that it was impossible for her and Shinjuli to be together. She knew that in the battle between the immortal Dao and the demon Dao, for the sake of victory and defeat, both sides would use tricks. Chapter 1389. She knew that she should completely let go of Shinjuli. From now on, he would walk his own path, and she would walk her own path. Her future path was to be a cold-blooded and emotionless devil ancestor. She would copy the path of the previous devil ancestor and reproduce from generation to generation. She knew all of this, but when she truly let go, she would no longer be able to see him when she opened her eyes every day. She would no longer be able to jump around beside him. She would no longer be able to eat the fish he roasted, the food he cooked, the tea he brewed. She would no longer be able to hear him call her Momo. Only then did she know that the pain of yearning was unbearable. She fell seriously ill. Every day, when she closed her eyes, she would see his eyes that seemed to be able to see through everything, but also seemed to be deathly still. Shuilan came here almost every day to watch over her, but she didn't want to pay attention to him. Every time she saw Shuilan, she would think of the stupid things she had done. Her heart would hurt even more, and she would feel even more sad. While she was sick, she also heard that the devil world had taken the opportunity to attack the immortal world several times. Every time, they won a great victory. The immortal world's vitality was greatly damaged, while the devil world's morale was high. Then, she inadvertently heard from a devil general that Shinjuli had died. At that moment, she felt as if she had been struck by lightning. Naturally, she didn't believe it. She thought that at most, he would fall seriously ill, and his power would decrease a bit. He was a god, how could he die from a stab to the heart? However, the devil ancestor had appeared at some point and earnestly told her that her constitution was the best weapon to kill a god. After Shinjuli joined with her, although the devil chi in her body wouldn't weaken him to the point of death, it would make his god body undergo a huge change. Within a year, his body would be in a half-human, half-god state, and his power would also decrease greatly. After a year, he would be able to slowly cultivate and adjust back. Within 3 years, he would regain his god body, and he would still be invincible in the world. Although his power wasn't weak in his half-human, half-god state, his body was still afraid of being injured. If his heart was stabbed, he would still die. What's more, the sword that Shui-Emo used to kill him was specially made. It was called the God-slaying sword. The moment the sword was inserted, the first thing to be destroyed was not the heart, but the body. In addition, Demon Alpha wanted to kill Shinjuli completely. She used her extremely poisonous knife silks to make up for it. She took advantage of the situation to crush Shinjuli's heart. That's why Shinjuli must be dead. The demon realm has finally gotten rid of such a huge threat. Momo, your contribution cannot go unnoticed. The devil ancestor concluded with these words. Seeing that Shui-Emo was still in a daze, the devil ancestor laughed out loud and finally disappeared with satisfaction. Shui-Emo's mind rumbled. When she finally reacted, she turned her head and saw Shuilan standing not too far away. His red robe danced in the dark night like a flame of despair. Momo, is this true? For the sake of the devil world, you really gave your body to that man? This was the first time Shuilan, who had always been calm and gentle to her, spoke so sharply to her. Shui-Emo closed her eyes. She didn't want to answer him, and she didn't want to explain. In her heart, it was the stupidest thing in the world, and she wished she could erase it from her life. She was even more tired of living in the demon palace. Of course, she didn't see Shinjuli's corpse with her own eyes. She didn't believe that he was really dead. She didn't give up and still held on to a tiny bit of hope. She finally found an opportunity to sneak out of the demon realm and sneaked into Shinjuli's former residence. However, she only saw desolation. Shinjuli and Long Chuan were nowhere to be found. Chapter 1390. She didn't give up and went to the illusory castle. That place was also cold and cheerless. She didn't see a single person, and there were still remnants of his aura in the air. Shui Emo sat blankly on the cloud bed for a moment. Her heart was uncomfortably empty, as if she had stepped on the edge of a cliff. Only her heart was left to fall into hell. Longing was like weeds. Once it grew, it would spread and become a disaster. She began to use all kinds of connections, openly and secretly inquiring about Shinjoli's whereabouts, but no one knew. Shinjoli seemed to have really disappeared from this world. No one could find any trace of him or find his whereabouts. Shui Emo stood in the boundless world, not knowing where to go for a while. The more she couldn't find him, the more she wanted to find him. In the end, she simply searched crazily, and her footprints went to every corner of the 3 realms. She told herself that she only wanted to confirm whether he was dead or alive. As long as he was alive, as long as she could confirm that he was alive, she could leave with peace of mind. Even if the 2 of them became enemies from now on, there would still be a chance to meet. It was always better than nothing. Perhaps the heavens were grateful for her heart, but she finally received a piece of news that she didn't know whether it was true or false. Shinjoli had been brought back to the Qilin clan by Long Chuan. After a series of hardships inconvenient for outsiders, she finally found the always mysterious Qilin clan. Then, she secretly sneaked in. When she was with Shinjoli, she hid her strength. In the eyes of the people of the immortal world, she was a seductive vixen. Her ability to charm people was amazing, but her actual ability wasn't much. In the past year, Shinjoli had taught her a lot of martial arts, such as the art of breaking enchantments and some cultivation techniques. Other techniques weren't of much use to her this time, but breaking barriers allowed her to avoid the patrols of the Qilin clan. Quietly, she entered the most secret and core secret room of the Qilin clan. Here, she finally saw the Shinjoli that she had yearned for day and night. He was lying there quietly, motionless with a snow-white complexion. She slowly walked over, her whole body trembling. Step by step, she walked to his side. Then, she stretched out her trembling hand to check his aura. The moment she touched his wrist, her heart completely sank into an icy abyss. His body was cold and stiff, lying there like a statue, without any signs of life. The rumors in the outside world were not wrong. He was really dead. Shui Emo could no longer stand. She fell down in front of his chilled jade couch, one of her hands tightly gripping his, unwilling to let go. His vision turned black, and he felt as if he was drowning, unable to breathe. She sat there for an unknown amount of time before she finally sat up as if she had suddenly realized something. She unbuttoned his shirt and saw the wound on his chest. There was a bloody hole there, and his heart was shattered beyond recognition. She trembled as she hugged his waist, desperately transferring her psychokinesis to him. Shinjoli had taught her how to heal wounds caused by swords and knives. He had even used his psyche power to heal her. The method she used was exactly what Shinjoli had taught her. Every time Shinjoli used it on her, she could see her wound heal very quickly. After she learned it, she had once looked for an opportunity to test it on Shinjoli. Seeing the small wound she had bitten on his finger heal at a speed visible to the naked eye, it showed that she had already mastered this technique. Chapter 1391. But when she used it on Shinjoli, it didn't have any effect. She channeled her psychokinesis until she was dizzy. The bloody hole was still a bloody hole, shining brightly and stinging her eyes. She didn't know how long she tossed around beside him. In the end, she simply hugged his hand, trying to use her body temperature to warm him up. She tossed around until Long Chuan, who was guarding Shinjoli's corpse, returned. She didn't want to face Long Chuan anymore, so she promptly turned invisible and left. She began to inquire about various methods of reviving people in the 3 realms. Finally, she heard that the moonlight flute, which was produced by the Immortal Kingdom, was made from moonlight iron. Once it was blown, it could gather souls and bring people back to life. Thus, she went to the Immortal Kingdom and searched for moonlight iron on the mountain for more than a month without rest. Finally, she found a piece of moonlight iron that could be used to make a moonlight flute. She handed it to the blacksmith there, asking him to forge it for her. Making a moonlight flute was very time-consuming. She made an appointment with the blacksmith and left. Then, she returned to the Immortal Demon Continent to see if there were any other methods. As long as there was a glimmer of hope, she wouldn't give up. She just didn't expect that there would be an even bigger accident waiting for her. She had just returned to the Immortal Kingdom when she met Shuailan. For more than a month, she had been running around incognito. Even the people of the demon world couldn't find a trace of her. Only Shuailan, who was the only one who understood and knew her, was familiar with her aura, and was familiar with her way of hiding, so he found her. After not seeing each other for only a few months, Shuailan had also lost a lot of weight. In the wilderness, he stood there, wearing a big red robe, looking at her. "Momo, you've lost weight." Shuailan's feelings were very complicated. Subconsciously, she still didn't want to see Shuailan again. Because when she saw him, she would think of the sword she stabbed Shinjiuli with. She faintly nodded to him and prepared to leave. Shuailan spoke from behind her. "Momo, he's already dead. Can you forget him? Let's start over, okay?" Shuailan didn't pay attention to him, and didn't even stop her footsteps. There were some things that couldn't be forgotten or let go just like that. He's a god, not a human. If he's dead, he's dead. He can't be revived with the moonlight flute. "You're just wasting your efforts," Shuailan said. Shuailan turned around to look at him, her face slowly turning pale. "You know that I made the moonlight flute. Did you do something behind my back again?" Shuailan looked at her with a hint of hurt in his eyes. "Momo, do you not trust me that much? If I wanted to play tricks on the moonlight flute, I wouldn't tell you now." Shuailan let out a sigh of relief. Shuailan smiled bleakly. "Momo, don't tell me you don't even trust me now. No matter what, I won't harm you." Shuailan pursed her lips. "No, I trust you." In this world, the only person she trusted was him. "Momo, let's find a place to sit down. I want to talk to you." Shuailan's eyebrows relaxed. He walked over and held her hand as usual. "Maybe I can help you a little." Shuailan took a step back to avoid him. When she heard his last sentence, her eyes lit up. "You have a way." Shuailan slowly let go of his empty hand and sighed. "Maybe. Let's find a place to rest first. I'll tell you in detail." Chapter 1392. He looked at her with a gentle gaze. "Momo, you're as pale as a ghost right now. You must rest first." Shuailan couldn't persuade him, so she naturally didn't give up any hope. She found a restaurant with him and asked for a private room, chatting while eating. During their conversation, Shuailan learned that the demon world was in chaos because of her departure. She didn't know how many people the demon ancestor had sent out to look for her. He was also sent by the demon ancestor. Shuailan asked her if she would never return to the demon world. Shuailan's reply was straightforward: "If I can't resurrect him, I will never return." Shuailan was slightly sad. "So you really like him that much? But even if you resurrect him, so what? Even if he resurrects, I'm afraid he won't forgive you. Why are you so persistent?" Shuailan didn't want to answer his question. Right now, she only wanted to resurrect Shinjiuli. She didn't care about anything else. She looked at Shuailan. "You came to find me just to talk about this?" "I still have things to do." Just as she was about to say goodbye, Shuailan finally sighed, "Momo, sit down and listen to me. Have you heard of the whirling ginseng fruit?" Shuaimo was somewhat at a loss. She had heard of the whirling ginseng fruit and the whirling ginseng fruit, but she had never heard of it. But now that Shuailan mentioned it, there must be a reason, so she sat down again. From Shuailan's words, she knew that the whirling ginseng fruit was a sacred fruit that grew in the forbidden land of ice and snow. It bore fruit once every 3,000 years, one at a time. It looked like a human heart and was called the Heart of God. It could resurrect all living things in the three realms. Finally, Shuailan explained to her, "Of course, this thing is extremely rare. It's hard to say whether it has this function or not. Moreover, the place where the whirling ginseng fruit grows is guarded by ancient mythological beasts. It's not easy to get close." He mentioned a lot of difficulties. Shuaimo only asked one question: "Where is this forbidden land of ice and snow?" Shuailan clenched his fists. "Momo, you have to understand that your martial arts body is of the fire attribute, while that place is of the water attribute. The danger there is beyond your imagination. Perhaps you will lose your life before you reach the tree. Even if you risked your life to defeat those mythological beasts, the fruits on the tree might not have grown yet, or they might not have matured yet. Even if you risked your life, you might not get anything. At the very least, even if you go through all the hardships to get that fruit, you might not be able to resurrect Shinjioli. I think you should think about it carefully. Is it worth it to go there?" Shuaimo's expression didn't change. She still asked the same question: "Where is this forbidden land of ice?" In her heart, there was no such thing as whether it was worth it or not. Shuailan looked at her for a long time. Finally, he closed his eyes and smiled bitterly. "I knew it, this would be the result. Momo, I'll take you there. I've been there before." As expected, Shuailan took her to the forbidden land of ice and snow. It was a place comparable to the North and South Poles. Ice and snow covered the entire earth. Ice towers and icebergs could be seen everywhere. The cold here wasn't in the ordinary sense. Every wind that blew here seemed to drill into a person's bones, freezing them from the depths of their marrow to the outside. Even if she used psychokinesis, it wouldn't help. Even if she used psychokinesis, it wouldn't help. She could only rely on her origin flame to warm herself. Not only was it cold, but there were also all kinds of vicious beasts. Shuaimo's whole body was frozen stiff. Chapter 1393. Shuaimo's whole body was frozen stiff. She and Shuailan worked together to kill all kinds of monsters that attacked her. After untold hardships, they finally found the dancing tree. Under the dancing tree, there was a huge swan eye wandering around. This mythological beast was like a trap. Only by killing this mythological beast could they see the ginseng fruit on the dancing tree. Shuaimo didn't hesitate to fight with the swan eye. Shuailan naturally joined in, but halfway through the fight, he suddenly fell into a crack in the ground and disappeared in the blink of an eye. Shuaimo wanted to pull him back, but she couldn't. She could only watch him disappear into the crack. Fortunately, she knew that Shuailan wouldn't die. With his martial arts, even if he was buried alive, he could come out again. So she couldn't save him in time because the swan eye was still fighting her. Once provoked, the swan eye would fight with all its might, unless she gave up on the ginseng fruit and escaped. But once she escaped, all her previous efforts would be wasted. At this time, Shuaimo could only fight with all her might against the ancient mythological beast alone. It was the most difficult battle in history. Shuaimo's whole body was covered in wounds. Her bones could be seen, and blood kept flowing out. The mythological beast also didn't have any advantage, and its injuries were more serious than hers. 3 days and 3 nights of fierce fighting. The swan and I was ferocious and had thick blood. Even Shinjioli had to spend a lot of effort to defeat it, let alone Shui Emo, whose martial arts were far inferior to his. Shui Emo didn't know how many times she had faced life and death in this fierce battle, but she had broken through. She also had many opportunities to escape, but she chose to give them all up. The only thing she didn't give up was the dancing ginseng fruit. She had already disregarded life and death. Even if she had to risk her life, she had to get the dancing ginseng fruit. This was her only hope. Even the most tyrannical were afraid of those who didn't care about their lives. Finally, on the 3rd night, the huge mythological beast fell to the ground with a loud bang under Shui Emo's sword. Shui Emo was also like a lamp that had run out of oil. Her entire body was bathed in blood, and her vision was turning black. However, she was still holding on, waiting for the moment when the barrier would open. The divine beast fell to the ground, and the barrier opened with a rumble. Sure enough, Shui Emo saw a fruit that looked very much like a human heart on the swaying tree. It was bright red, as if it had already ripened. Shui Emo was so excited that her whole body was almost trembling. She flew over to pick the fruit. The unforeseen event happened in that instant. Just as she was about to take the fruit, her heart suddenly turned cold. The tip of a silver-white sword protruded from her chest, reflecting a cold light under the moonlight. The tip of the sword suddenly twisted and pulled out, causing blood to splatter everywhere. All of this happened in the blink of an eye. Shui Emo, who was in the air, had no way of dodging and could only take this blow. She felt a sharp pain in her heart, and the intense pain caused her face to turn pale instantly. So this is what it feels like to be pierced through the heart. Who was it? In this snowfield, apart from her and Shuilan, who else could it be? Shui Emo only felt that the strength in her body was rapidly drained away. However, she still picked the fruit without caring about it, protecting it in her arms as she staggered to the ground. Shui Emo stood in front of her, laughing arrogantly. Shui Emo, you lost. From now on, I am the devil ancestor. On the sword in her hand, drops of blood were rolling down. Shuilan stood beside Shuilan, silently looking at Shui Emo. Shui Emo looked at Shuilan, then looked at Shui Emo, and understood everything. Chapter 1394. It turned out to be a meticulously planned plot, a plot of rebellion. Shuilan had lured her here, let her and the mythological beast fight until both sides were injured, and then Snowy Talisman would give her a fatal blow. Everyone was happy. So this was what it felt like to be betrayed, to be stabbed in the heart by someone you trusted. At that moment, she suddenly remembered the look in Shinjioli's eyes when he looked at her. At that time, was he also so desperate? Was he also so disheartened? She stood there with a pale face, leaning on her sword. She looked at Shuilan, and then at Snowy Talisman. How did you come back to life? Snowy Talisman was very proud. She pulled Shuilan's sleeve, leaned her head on his chest, and asked, "What do you think?" Snowy Mo's gaze slowly turned to Shuilan. Shuilan's face was pale. He pursed his thin lips and smiled. "Momo, you let me down first." Snowy Talisman originally didn't die. She had been bitterly tortured in the blood purgatory under the devil ancestor's control. I accidentally found her and rescued her. Momo, she is more suitable than you to be the devil ancestor's successor. The devil ancestor also said that she is more suitable than you. He stared straight into Snowy Mo's eyes, a trace of madness in his eyes. "Momo, do you hate me?" Snowy Mo's chest was bleeding. Her heart was in pain. It was very painful. However, it was only an organ pain, not a heartache. She was only disappointed at being betrayed by her most trusted friend. Shui Lan had imagined countless reactions from Snowy Mo, such as laughing at the sky, dying together with him, or going hysterical, but Snowy Mo only calmly looked at him. Her eyes were first filled with surprise and disbelief, then disappointment and anger, until finally there was only darkness left. In the end, she didn't say anything, and slowly fell down. Blood flowed down her red dress to the ground. It dyed the ice field under her body red, like a red plum blossom blooming in the snow. It carried a sad and despairing aura. She slowly closed her eyes, and no longer moved. Shui Lan stood there like a fool for a moment, and suddenly walked towards her step by step. Momo. He gently nudged her. Shui Mo remained motionless, but her complexion gradually turned pale, and her aura gradually weakened. Her wrist was held by Shui Lan. Shui Lan's fingers were colder than her wrist and even trembled a little. He seemed to be taking her pulse. A moment later, he suddenly raised his head to look at Snowrobe Talisman. Snowrobe Talisman, you've injured her soul root. The Snowrobe Talisman laughed shrilly. So what? Since I survived, she must die. But you promised me that you wouldn't take her life. Sorry, I used too much force. Shui Xiu spread out his hands, his voice unconcerned. She smiled at Shui Lan and said softly, Shui Lan, this woman doesn't even put you in her eyes. You've done everything for her, but you're nothing in her eyes. She let you down, so why do you still care about her life? Actually, we are the most suitable couple. She doesn't deserve you. How about you be my royal husband in the future? If you and I join hands, we'll definitely bring glory to the demon realm. Although my martial arts aren't as good as yours, I have half of the demon ancestor's power. Once I absorb her, I'll become the real demon ancestor. My zither can sweep away everything. Shui Lan, at that time, the demon realm will be ours. Shui Lan, his complexion became even paler. He didn't speak again, but directly made his move. He raised his hand and directly used a big move on Snowrobe Talisman. Chapter 1395. He raised his hand and directly used a big move on the Snowrobe Talisman. A red light that could almost burn half the sky madly smashed towards the Snowrobe Talisman. Stop. Shui Lan, you're crazy. You're crazy. What do you want to do? The Snowrobe Talisman angrily screamed, don't forget, it was your idea to scheme against her. I didn't tell you to kill her. Snowrobe Talisman, I can save you, and I can also send you back. Shui Lan's voice was cold. Do you really think I'm not on guard against you? He didn't know what kind of move he used on the Snowrobe Talisman, but the Snowrobe Talisman suddenly screamed and was directly grabbed by Shui Lan. His fingertips directly grabbed the Snowrobe Talisman's back and pinched her spine. The Snowrobe Talisman's complexion also changed, and her voice became more and more shrill. Shui Lan, what do you want to do? I'm now the only successor of the Devil Ancestor in the Devil Realm. If you kill me, the Devil Realm will be in imminent danger. Shui Lan looked at the Snowrobe Talisman who was desperately struggling, and revealed a sinister look. The Devil Realm. Without her, the Devil Realm is nothing. Snowrobe Talisman, I want you to be buried with her. His hand gradually tightened, and with a crisp crack, her spine was finally completely broken by Shui Lan, and her head softly drooped down. Shui Lan swung his hand and threw away the Snowrobe Talisman's corpse. He used a cleaning technique to clean his fingers, and then slowly picked up the lifeless Snowrobe Talisman on the ground, and pressed his face against hers. Momo, I'm sorry. Just as he said this, he suddenly stopped, and his body stiffened. He looked at the Snowrobe Talisman in his arms, and his eyes widened in disbelief. Snowrobe Talisman didn't know when she opened her eyes, but the bottom of her eyes was blood red. Her sparkling jade-like palm hit his chest. Her movements were as fast as lightning, and Shuailan did not even have time to react. Shuailan's face instantly turned as white as snow. He looked down at her and said hoarsely, "Momo, so, you didn't die." Shuai-mo didn't say anything. Instead, she pushed Shuailan away. Shuailan's body crashed into the swaying ginseng tree and slid down again. He violently coughed up blood, but his eyes were fixed on Shuailan's eyes. It was as if he had gone mad, but at the same time, it was something else. He wanted to say something, but when he opened his mouth, another mouthful of blood came out. Shuai-mo didn't pay any more attention to him. She was well aware that her palm strike was a secret technique of the devil world's devil ancestor. The one struck by it would be thoroughly sealed, sink into a blood coffin, and forever fall into hell. For all eternity, they would suffer the pain of being pierced by a blood blade, never to be free. This was the demon ancestor's cruelest punishment for traitors. It was also the demon ancestor's unique skill. Shuai-mo didn't expect that she would have to use this move on Shuailan. The wound on her chest burst open again, and blood flowed out continuously, but she didn't care at all. She staggered up and stretched out her palm. A pure black light was emitted and quickly climbed onto Snow-Robed Talisman's body. Snow-Robed Talisman's entire body melted at a speed visible to the naked eye. This was also a skill unique to the demon ancestor's successor. Once this skill was used, she would absorb Snow-Robed Talisman and completely fall into the devil path. Shuailan, who was lying there gasping for breath, suddenly opened his eyes wide. Seeing this scene, his face changed greatly. "Momo, don't." Shuai-mo still didn't pay attention to him. The black light in her palm gradually swallowed Snow-Robed Talisman's body until there was nothing left. Shuailan's face was deathly pale. "Momo." Chapter 1396. Shuai-mo slowly turned around. After absorbing the Shuai talisman, the wound on her chest healed at a speed visible to the naked eye. A faint black aura was emitted from her body, but her eyes were blood red, as pure as gems. She calmly looked at Shuailan, her fingers slightly bent. A tremor came from under Shuailan's body. The tremor seemed to come from the depths of the earth, as if a terrifying demon beast was slowly awakening. The ground under him cracked inch by inch, and a red light rose from the cracks, shining on Shuailan's body. Shuailan trembled violently. His body seemed to be penetrated inch by that red light. Large beads of sweat appeared on his forehead. It was obvious that he was in extreme pain. "Momo." His eyes were full of pain. His body struggled forward without regard for his life. "Don't turn into a demon." The red light had originally completely locked his body, but with his struggle, countless wounds immediately appeared on his body. Blood dyed his robes red, and his cheeks paled even more. The blood on his body seemed to have stimulated Shuai-mo. Her fingers slightly paused, and she turned to look at Shuailan. "Momo, you don't want to turn into a demon. Don't let the demon energy control you." Shuailan's voice trembled slightly. Shuai-mo's body stiffened again. Her fingers slowly opened, and the half-formed spell was cut off. The ground under Shuailan's body finally stopped shaking. The red light binding him also showed signs of dissipating. "Momo." Shuailan's eyes brightened. He struggled to break free from the red light binding him, and crawled towards Shuai-mo. "Momo, I know, you can't bear to kill me in the end." Shuai-mo's eyes flashed. With a wave of her sleeve, a crystal coffin appeared under Shuailan, wrapping him inside. "Momo." Shuailan's face was as pale as death. He struggled to get up. "You can't do this to me." Shuai-mo slightly lowered her eyes. When she opened them again, the red light in her eyes had already dissipated, leaving only a silent black. Shuailan. Her voice was slightly hoarse, but there was no emotion. Forget me. She flicked her fingers, and pure black energy shot out from her fingertips, shooting into Shuailan's body. Shuailan's body stiffened. His eyes widened, and he watched as the huge crystal coffin's lid, sealing him alive inside the crystal coffin. Momo, you're so ruthless. These were the last words Shuailan spoke before he was sealed. He closed his eyes. He was completely engulfed by the darkness. When the black light dissipated, Shuai-Mo looked at the remaining black light in her hand, and her eyes flashed with disgust. What she hated the most was the Devil Ancestor's absorption technique. When she first learned it, she resisted and never used it. She didn't expect that in the end, she would use this method to absorb the snow-robe talisman. The twins were originally like one body, each occupying half of the devil chi. Now, the snow-robe talisman didn't eat her, but was instead eaten by her. The two kinds of devil chi merged, and Shuai-Mo's strength increased more than twofold. She also became a real devil body, and could no longer turn back. Her gaze fell on the crystal coffin. Inside the coffin, Shuailan had already fallen into a deep sleep. His palms were still pressed against the coffin lid unwillingly, as if he would push the lid open at any moment. Shuailan, you and I are even. She whispered and waved her fingers. Several blood-red crystal chains penetrated the coffin lid, pulling it down to the ground. Chapter 1397. After doing this, she flew out of the forbidden land of ice and snow without any reluctance, directly returning to the demon world. The previous demon ancestor, because of the joint attack of Shuailan and Shuai-Tong, had been seriously injured and was hiding in a dark corner to cultivate. Shuai-Mo quickly found it by relying on the guidance of the demon chi. She finally got a clear look at its appearance. It was neither male nor female, like a pair of twins, less than 3 feet tall, wrapped in a mass of black chi. Shuai-Mo silently looked at it, her face pale. The demon ancestor saw her and was shocked at first, then overjoyed. The male and female voices spoke together. Momo, my child, you finally came back. This lord has been worried about you. Come, let this lord take a good look at you. Shuai-Mo's eyes drooped, and just like in the past, she replied, yes. Then she walked towards it. The demon ancestor's red eyes flashed with excitement. It turned into a mass of black chi and pounced on her body. Momo, this lord knew you would come back. Its palms flashed with knife-sharp nails on her back, as if it wanted to do something. But the moment it pounced on her body, it knew it had made a big mistake. It was horrified to find that its body began to slowly melt the moment it pounced on Shuai-Mo. It originally wanted to take the opportunity to absorb some demon chi from Shuai-Mo to recover its strength, but it didn't expect that it would be absorbed by her. Only now did it realize that the twin demon chi in Shuai-Mo's body had already fused. Once the twin demon chi fused, it would become incomparably powerful, and it would no longer be able to control her. It looked on helplessly as its body melted inch by inch on her body, disappearing little by little. It struggled with all its might, but it couldn't break free. Shuai-Mo, you actually already killed Shuai-Tong. Ha ha ha, good. Good. Those two joined forces to plot against me. This lord thought they would succeed, but I didn't expect you to win. Momo, you're always able to exceed my expectations. However, you can't consume me right now. You're not married yet, and you're not pregnant yet. If you consume me right now, the next generation successor won't be born. Shuai-Mo looked at it expressionlessly, only coldly saying a few words, there's no successor. The demon ancestor's eyes widened and he was stunned. Suddenly, he laughed. Momo, what nonsense are you talking about? Without a successor, how are you going to divide the devil chi in your body? Without a successor, you will soon be completely controlled by the demonic chi, and your body will explode. Shui Emo ignored it, allowing it to melt even faster on her body. The fiend ancestor was finally afraid. Momo, you can't do this. I'm your mother, mother. Shui Emo raised her eyebrows and suddenly laughed. Her laughter was clear and melodious, but full of sarcasm. Do you think of me as your child? What kind of mother would scheme against her child? This seat is forcing you to become a talent. Momo, you're good at everything. You're smart enough, and your innate ability is also high. Your only flaw is that you're too soft-hearted. You can't become a real demon. The demon ancestor endured the pain of being melted bit by bit to explain himself. He only begged her to let him go. It did not want to disappear just like that. It had gone through a lot of trouble to get the blood of God. It had gone through a lot of trouble to find a way to live forever, to be the demon ancestor forever. Yes, my flaw is that I'm too soft-hearted. That's why your schemes have succeeded time and time again, harming others and yourself. Chapter 1398. Shui Emo chuckled and stared at it. Let me ask you, did you deliberately injure Shuilan? Shinjioli didn't injure him that badly. Devil ancestor. Momo, speak. I want to hear the truth. Otherwise, you won't have a chance to speak. Shui Emo circulated her power, making the devil ancestor melt faster in her body. This kind of absorption clearly caused the devil ancestor extreme pain. It howled, "Stop! Stop! This king will tell you the truth. Speak." At that time, Shinjioli did injure Shuilan, but it wasn't this serious. This king injured him a bit more. But this king had a sense of propriety. At that time, he was the most important person in your heart. I couldn't let him die. Momo, this king didn't really want to hurt you. Before you got the god's blood, this king resurrected him for you. I've always been good to him, and even promised to marry you to him. I didn't expect him to be so cruel and unscrupulous. He actually cooperated with Shui Emo to plot against this king, and even plotted against you. Fortunately, Shuemo, you were smart enough. Shui Emo's face became even paler. She knew it. With Shinjioli's character and martial arts, if he wanted to kill someone, he wouldn't need to make them look like they were bitten by a dog. Killing with one palm was more like his style. She hated herself for believing it at that time. You resurrected him because you thought he was more suitable to be the father of the next generation's heir. Momo, didn't you always like him and trust him? I'm just fulfilling your wish. Shui Emo didn't speak again. She closed her eyes slightly and circulated her power again, melting the devil ancestor bit by bit as it screamed and cursed, Shui Emo, you will regret it. You will be a sinner of the demon world. After you, the devil ancestor will disappear. Also, you will soon become like this king. These were the devil ancestor's last words. The devil ancestor disappeared. Shui Emo stood there in a daze for a moment, then slightly closed her eyes. The snow-robe talisman sword had pierced her vitals. At that time, she had already died. The reason why she had been able to hold on until now was because she had used the forbidden technique to absorb the snow-robe talisman. She had just obtained the whirling ginseng fruit and had yet to see Shinjioli resurrect. She was unwilling to die just like that. Therefore, she had to live. This was the only thing that kept her alive. The once insufferably arrogant demon ancestor only left behind a black ring on the ground. Shui Emo lowered her eyes and looked at the ring. She knew that this was a devil ring, and it had great functions. It was the inheritance of the devil ancestor. She slowly picked it up. Wisps of black gas twined around the ring in her palm, as if it wanted to automatically put on her finger. I won't become like you. Absolutely not. Shui Emo gripped the ring in her hand, and a blood-curdling screech came from her palm. A moment later, she opened her palm, and the ring turned into a pile of powder, no longer able to form. Her eyes were dark and gloomy without a trace of light. The demon ancestor was killed by her, the snow-robed talisman was absorbed by her, and Shui Lan was sealed by her, and she had finally turned into a devil. She had finally reached the last step of her destiny. She raised her head and laughed, but there were tears in her laughter. She didn't know if she was laughing at her own stupidity, or at her destiny that she couldn't escape no matter what. Now, there was only one thing left for her to do. Her figure rose and flew towards the Qilan Holy Land. Shui Emo easily sneaked into the Qilan Holy Land and arrived at the ice room with ease. Rolling monthly votes at the beginning of the month was a must. La 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 la. Chapter 1399. Shinjiuli was still lying there quietly. His face was pale and his eyes were closed. It was as if he had fallen asleep. Although she was prepared, seeing him like this, Shui Mo's body still swayed, her face pale. She grabbed his hand, which was frighteningly cold. She took out the whirling ginseng fruit from her storage space. Just as she was about to place it on his chest, she suddenly heard a noise outside the door. Startled, Shui Mo put the fruit back into the storage space and hid herself by the wall. Two people came in from outside, one elegant and dignified, the other white-haired, hale and hearty. It was Long Chuan and an unknown old man. The two first checked Shinjiuli's injuries. Long Chuan held his breath and looked at the old man, as if he was looking at a savior. How is it? The old man slowly circled Shinjiuli twice, looking here and there. After a moment, he sighed and shook his head. It's hopeless. My grass recovery pill can't save him. His divine heart is injured. A person's heart is easy to heal, but a divine heart is difficult to heal. The light in Long Chuan's eyes dimmed. Obviously, this was not the first time he was disappointed. Shui Mo stood not far from them. She was now the most powerful existence in the world. Therefore, Long Chuan and the old man didn't notice that there was another person in the room. She stood there quietly, listening to their conversation. The two people talked for a moment and then left. Shui Mo listened quietly. The more she listened, the paler her face became. I heard that the whirling ginseng fruit can replace the divine heart. Maybe I can find it and bring Master back. Nonsense. The whirling ginseng fruit can only prolong life and heal injuries. If the Supreme God is still alive, eating it may greatly increase his strength, but it has no resurrection effect. The old man shook his head decisively. How do you know if you don't try? Maybe it really works. Long Chuan was unwilling. The old man shook his head. No need to try. Thousands of years ago, there was an immortal whose heart was dug out by the people of the devil realm. In order to resurrect him, his wife also tried her best to find a good way. She also heard about the whirling ginseng fruit. She risked her life and paid the price of a leg and an arm to get that thing. When she came back and used it on the immortal, it had no effect at all. His wife committed suicide out of despair. Long Chuan was speechless, and Shui Mo's face was also as white as paper. She stood with her back against the wall. If not for the wall supporting her, she might have already fallen. It was obvious that Long Chuan had been desperately trying to find a way to resurrect Shinjiuli recently, so he had mentioned several methods in succession. There were some that Shui Mo had heard of, but there were also some that she hadn't. However, they were all rejected by the old man. Every rejection was like a bomb, causing people's hearts to sink into the abyss. What about the moonlight flute? The moonlight flute can only revive mortals, but the venerable sovereign is a god. Long Chuan and the old man finally left. Shui Mo's figure appeared. Her lips were tightly pursed, without a trace of blood. She looked down at the swirling ginseng fruit in her arms, and then looked at Shinjuli, who was lying there without a sound. She didn't believe it. She didn't believe it. She wanted to try. No matter what, he had to try. Shui Mo staggered to her feet and carefully put the whirling ginseng fruit into Shinjuli's chest. The process was very complicated, but Shui Mo did it well. She didn't dare to make any more mistakes, and she couldn't tolerate any more mistakes. Chapter 1400. After doing this, she looked at Shinjuli with bated breath, as if she was looking at her last life-saving straw, hoping for a miracle. For a long time, there was no movement. Shinjuli was still lying there quietly, without the slightest sound. Useless, all useless. She had risked her life to do all this, but it was useless. Shui Mo sat down dejectedly, looking at Shinjuli in a daze, her eyes full of despair and blankness. Shui Mo sat in the quiet room for several days. She was like a soulless doll, with all her strength sucked away. She could only sit there in a daze. During this time, Long Chuan brought many people, each of whom was older than the last, each of whom had a higher status than the last. In the end, he even invited the young master of the dragon race, the person with the highest medical skills in the 3 realms. But they all said there was no way. In the end, the young master of the dragon clan sighed and said an ancient secret technique: if the witch who assassinated the venerable sovereign exiles herself to the most barren place, and then commits suicide there, enduring the consequences of being alone in every life, she can make a wish. If she happens to wish for the venerable sovereign to wake up, then this wish will come true. Of course, there are still some other things needed. Alas, this method, it's useless to talk about it. Long Chuan left in disappointment again. After they left, Shui Mo was stunned for a long time, the old man's words echoing in her mind. After an unknown period of time, she got up and looked at Shinjuli lying there quietly. She used her eyes to trace his celestial face over and over again, finally revealing a bitter smile. She leaned over and kissed Shinjuli. His lips were as cold as ice, but she kissed him passionately. After the kiss parted, her eyes were full of determination. "Jiuli, I will wake you up." She turned and left, running towards her destiny. Ningxuema finally withdrew her hand, her body slightly trembling. The intense sadness from her previous life had always shrouded her heart, making her unable to recover for a while. She looked down at the coffin, her heart aching even more. Pursing her lips, she flicked her sleeve, and the coffin opened. Sorrow washed over him. Inside the coffin lay a red-clothed girl. Her skin was delicate, and her eyes were slightly closed. Her thick and curly eyelashes were like small fans. There was a sword in her chest. It was the god-slayer that she had used to plot against Shinjuli. Her clothes were soaked in blood, making her look even more beautiful. The moment Shui Lan saw the girl, his body swayed and his face turned pale. He wanted to call out Momo's name, but he swallowed his words. His heart ached terribly. In his previous life, had his Momo died so decisively? Ningxuema looked at herself in her previous life and fell into a daze. She did not know how to react. After recovering her true memories, Shui Mo's sorrow, anger, despair, and confusion all surged into her heart like a flood, drowning her whole being. Her emotions were too many, too chaotic, so her face was devoid of emotion. It turned out that his previous life was so miserable. As it turned out, it wasn't the great god and the snowy talisman who had joined hands to kill her. It was Shui Lan. As it turned out, after the great god was killed by her, he never woke up. As it turned out, his fate of being a cursed star was because of his previous life's curse. There was an answer to everything now. Ning Xuema was silent for a long time, standing there like a statue, motionless and silent. After a while, she finally moved. With a flick of her sleeve, the coffin burst into flames. Chapter 1401. After a long time, she finally moved. With a flick of her sleeve, the coffin instantly burst into flames. Shui Yimo's red robes were half lit and half dark in the flames before finally turning into ashes. Ning Xuema calmly looked at the flames, lost in thought. Looking at the girl who disappeared in the flames, it was as if she was looking at herself. Shui Yimo's previous life was so miserable that no one could collect her corpse. She could only make a coffin for herself and commit suicide in it. Then, using the last of her strength, she closed the lid of the coffin and sealed her corpse in the darkness. On her deathbed, she absent-mindedly made a wish: I am willing to use my life as a sacrifice to beg for the resurrection of Shinjioli. Despair, overwhelming despair. Now, the future her had to collect the corpse of her previous life. Ning Xuema didn't know what she was feeling. It turned out that the great god of her previous life didn't take revenge on her. Although she used her life as a sacrifice and the fate of the future as a sacrifice to revive him. But he didn't know. He recovered the memories of his previous life, but not the memories of this life. Thus, it wasn't strange that he recognized her again and thought that she came to his side with ulterior motives, that she was a scheming bitch. In the eyes of the current Shinjioli, she was only Shui Yimo, not Ning Xuema. So, whether he locked her in the ice purgatory or boiled her, it was all because of Shui Yimo. The future her was only repaying Shui Yimo's debt. No one cared about what kind of person Ning Xuema was, and no one cared about whether Ning Xuema was happy or sad for her. However, whether it was the previous life or the present, she didn't owe these two men anything. Thus, she didn't need to be entangled with these rotten things. She had already died once, and people who had died once saw things more indifferently. Momo, your memories have all been recovered. Shui Lan finally spoke, his voice slightly hoarse. He couldn't see the memories of Shui Yimo, but he knew that she would recover. Ning Xuema collected the ashes of his previous life into a small jade bottle and turned to leave. From the beginning to the end, she didn't even look at Shui Lan. In her past life, Shui Lan had killed her in disguise, but in this life, he had saved her twice. The debt between them could be considered settled. There was no need for them to cross paths anymore. Shui Lan's face was pale. His lips moved as if he wanted to say something, but in the end, he didn't say anything. He could only watch as Ning Xuema walked away. He slumped down on the stone platform and closed his eyes. He knew that once she recovered her true memories, this would be the result. She would completely leave him. Just now, he was also hesitant. Before her hands touched the coffin lid, he wanted to pull her away. But in the end, he held himself back. Because he understood that this curse could only be broken after she recovered all of her memories. Only then would she no longer be a lone star, and her life would no longer be so bitter. Even though he knew this would be the result, he still let her do it and recovered. Perhaps in this world, paper can never wrap fire, right? In order to make her return to his side, he deliberately used a forbidden technique to change the memories of Shui Yimo and force them into Ning Xuema's mind. That memory was 80% true and 30% false, so this lie wasn't easy to be exposed, but what he didn't expect was that even though Ning Xuema received those half-true and half-false memories, she still couldn't forget Shinjioli and still wanted to be with him. Chapter 1402. As a result, everything had developed to this point. In his previous life, in order to save Shui Yimo, he had been injured by Shinjioli's zither music. He had also received a palm strike from Shinjioli, causing him to faint on the spot. He didn't know what had happened afterwards, and he didn't know that the demon ancestor had forced Shui Emo to submit to him in order to make the effects more realistic. It had already been several months since he had woken up from his coma. His injuries were too severe, and he couldn't move for 2 months. Every day, he hoped that Shui Emo would come to see him. He hoped day after day, but she never showed up. He asked the little demons who served him, but they also kept their mouths shut. No one told him what had happened. He thought he had been abandoned again. Every day in the demon world felt like a year, lingering on the bed. His injuries often relapsed, and his state of mind became more and more depressed. Until one day, the demon ancestor told him that Shui Emo had gone to the immortal world to handle some matters, and told him to calm down. It was as if he had come back to life. He no longer resented her for not coming to see him, but began to worry about her. He only hoped that he would quickly get better so that he could go to the immortal world to help her. But before he could completely recover, Shui Emo finally came back, and she even brought the god's blood. Shuilan didn't want to ask her why she had taken the blood. When he saw her, he was overjoyed. He thought that Shui Emo would be happy to see him, and would ask after his well-being, but she didn't. When she saw him get better, she acted as if she didn't see it. She didn't even exchange a few words with him before leaving in a hurry. After that, she began to avoid him, avoiding him like the plague. Even if she had no choice but to meet him, she would always be cold and indifferent. He didn't know what he had done to offend her. He wanted to ask her, but he didn't even have a chance. He was lost, at a loss, and uneasy. Until one day, from her conversation with the demon ancestor, he found out that she and Shinjioli had an affair. He found out that in order to obtain the god's blood, she had sacrificed herself to that god, the god who had almost killed him and her. At that moment, he was thunderstruck. He had always liked her, and she didn't reject him. He was the only person she could rely on in this world. When she didn't agree to his proposal, he thought he didn't do enough, that he didn't do enough. He thought that sooner or later, she would be moved by his infatuation and happily marry him, but he had never thought that she would have such an affair with Shinjioli when he was injured and unconscious. He felt a kind of anger from being betrayed. He thought that Shui Emo would explain to him, but he didn't expect that Shui Emo would still treat him coldly, treating him like a passerby. He once secretly went to see her at night, but accidentally heard her call out Shinjioli's name in her sleep. At that moment, he felt as if his world was collapsing. He staggered away, feeling dispirited for a long time. Whether it was love or obsession, he couldn't let go of Shui Emo. He didn't care that she had been married to another man, he only wanted to stay by her side like before. He went to look for her again, only to find that she had already left the devil realm. The demon realm had been searching for her for a long time. After all, Shuilan understood her and was the first to find her. He saw her efforts to resurrect Shinjioli and saw her become more and more despondent with each passing day. The woman whom he had been protecting with all his heart for hundreds of years had lost her soul because of another man. To Shuilan, this was no less than a devastating blow. Chapter 1403. He finally began to feel hatred. Hatred was like weeds, once it grew, it would spread and become a disaster. He wanted to take revenge for her change of heart, but he also wanted to imprison her by his side, not allowing her to go anywhere. His biggest thought was to wash away her memories of Shinjioli, return to the demon world with him, and become his demon empress. But if he wanted to erase her memories, he had to take advantage of her being seriously injured and unable to fight back to use that kind of demonic technique. But at that time, Shui Emo's martial arts were already not low. After staying by Shinjioli's side for a year, her martial arts were already incomparable to when she was in the demon world. Even he was not her opponent, and he could not find a chance to seriously injure her. Once a wish became an obsession, he would become a demon. He had been trying to find such an opportunity. That day, in order to improve his martial arts, he took advantage of the demon ancestor's absence to secretly search his residence. He did not find any secret books that could improve his martial arts, but he did find Shui Emo. It was also the first time he saw Shui Emo. Shui Emo had been imprisoned and tortured by the demon ancestor for so long. The demon ancestor probably thought that she could not escape no matter what, so he did not hide any secrets from her, letting her know many unknown secrets. Shuailan finally learned those secrets from her. For example, the secret of the demon ancestor's reproduction. For example, the current demon ancestor wanted to be immortal, so he deliberately took the heart blood of a god to cultivate. As long as he cultivated for 3 years, he could reconstruct the demon god, return to normal, and obtain immortality. For example, the memory of the demon ancestor's successor was not easy to erase. Only when her twin sister used a special method to seriously injure her could it be erased. After Shuailan learned these secrets, he had an idea and negotiated with Shui Emo. He could help her get rid of the demon ancestor's imprisonment and help her ascend to the position of the demon ancestor's successor. The premise was that she had to listen to his command and plot against Shui Emo. Shui Emo naturally agreed. Shuailan also knew that this woman was vicious. When he established the agreement with her, he secretly did something to her body. If she did not betray him, it would be fine. But once she did, he would activate the forbidden spell on her body, causing her to instantly lose 2/3 of her martial arts. This way, he could quickly control and punish her. Everything went smoothly. He and the snow-robed talisman worked together to seriously injure the fiend ancestor and escape. Shuailan would look for Shui Emo and lure her into the trap, while Shui Tong would go there in advance to lay an ambush. Shuailan had been loyal and devoted to Shui Emo for his entire life, so he didn't have the heart to plot against her. He tried to sound her out. Even if she showed the slightest hint of giving up on reviving Shinjioli, he still didn't want to use this method, but no. Shui Emo seemed to have eaten a heavy weight. In order to revive Shinjioli, she was willing to pay any price. Thus, he finally steeled his heart and lured her to the forbidden land of ice and snow, allowing the snow-robed talisman to successfully plot against her. Everything had been very successful. The only thing he hadn't expected was that Snowy Talisman had actually ignored his earlier warning and killed Snowy Emo without permission. Shui Emo was forced to turn into a devil, severed all ties with him, and sealed him underground. He didn't know whether it was fate or misfortune, but 3,000 years later, under the miscalculation of Yin and Yang, it was actually her reincarnation who personally undid the seal for him. 3,000 years of great changes had turned the forbidden land of ice and snow into the heavenly book mountain. Perhaps it was because his obsession with Shui Emo was too deep, even after 3,000 years. Chapter 1404. Perhaps it was because his obsession with Shui Emo was too deep. After 3,000 years, although he had lost all memories of Shui Emo when he woke up, he still had a vague impression of her. The moment he saw Ning Shuima, he couldn't help but entangle himself with her. He couldn't bear to hurt her. Later, he was injured by Shinjioli. When he was hiding underground to recuperate, he didn't know what he touched, but it actually made his memories completely awaken. He finally recognized his Momo, but she no longer had the feelings of the past for him, and always hated him. She also fell in love with Shinjioli again. He didn't know what happened after she sealed him in her previous life, nor did he know how she died. In order to understand the truth, he secretly arranged to read her memories in her dreams, and finally understood another part of the truth that he didn't know in his previous life. It was only then that he understood that in his previous life, Shui Emo didn't take Shinjioli's heart blood for the demon world's mission, but to save him, she had never let him down, and she had always treated him as her best friend. It was he who personally killed the friendship between them, and it had reached an irreversible step. Initially, he wanted to read all of her dreams to find out the truth. However, he did not expect Shinjioli to discover the goo-venomous insect that he had placed on the moonlight flute. He removed the goo-venomous insect that he had placed on the moonlight flute. Ning Xuema was boiled, and he arrived in time to save her. She also completely gave up on Shinjioli and began to accept him. He thought that he had finally come to the end of his suffering. He only wanted to grasp the present and didn't want to pursue the past. But he didn't expect to find Shui Mo's hanging coffin here, and Ning Xuema also recovered her true memories and resolutely left. Momo, I never wanted to kill you. I just didn't want you to be the demon ancestor successor. I just wanted to wash away all your memories and take you back to the demon world. Momo, you should be mine, but you only have that man in your eyes. I've always been by your side, but you can't see me, Momo. I just want you to see me. Only by severely injuring you will I have the chance to erase all the memories of Shinjioli from your mind. I saved the snowy talisman because I wanted her to be the devil ancestor successor. Only then will you be free. I want you to be my demon empress. The road was filled with clouds, and the future was boundless. Ning Xuema stood in the void, looking at the vast and boundless Milky Way and the dazzling stars. She was somewhat absent-minded. Everything seemed to have been answered, and she could only sigh. Fate made fools of people. She took out the small jade bottle from her bosom, pulled out the cork, and scattered the ashes in the bottle into the void. In her previous life, she lived a lonely and bitter life. She struggled in the dark world and finally found love, but she destroyed it with her own hands. In the end, she ended up in such a pitiful, unlamentable state. The specks of light that filled the sky slowly dispersed into the boundless universe, drifting far away. The story of Shui Mo had already ended with her death. What about her, Ning Xuemo? Where should she go now? She simply sat in the void, hugging her knees and lost in thought. Shui Lan had plotted against her in her previous life. To tell the truth, although she was angry at being betrayed by her good friend, now that she thought about it, she could roughly understand why Shui Lan had done that. Shui Lan loved Shui Mo. He loved her to the point of obsession. In order to get her, he would do anything. She also knew that Shui Lan didn't really want to kill Shui Mo. He probably just wanted to take revenge for Shui Mo's coldness towards him. Chapter 1405. She also knew that Shui Lan didn't really want to kill Shui Mo. He probably just wanted to take revenge for Shui Mo's indifference to him. Or maybe he wanted to take the opportunity to imprison her and force her to stay by his side. But he didn't expect that Shui Mo would really turn into a demon. In fact, even if Shui Mo didn't turn into a demon, she wouldn't live long. Once she knew the forbidden technique to save Shinjioli, she would still do it without hesitation. So, she used the forbidden technique to exile herself to this cold and bitter land. It had nothing to do with Shui Lan. Strange, Shui Mo absorbed the snow cloth talisman and the demon ancestor's demon aura and really turned into a demon. It was reasonable to say that as long as people in this world had 7 emotions and 6 desires, demons couldn't be killed. They could only be sealed and couldn't be completely dissolved. Then, the demon aura in her body should be sealed in the coffin with her, enduring the wind and rain of this cold and bitter land together. When she destroyed the coffin, she didn't notice the existence of the demon aura. Did it run away long ago? She also thought of the little loli in her body who often tried to tempt her into becoming a demon. That should be the demon. She didn't know why it hid in the body of the original Miss Ning of the Marquis Mansion and absorbed all her psychokinesis, turning her into a super waste. And she just happened to cross over in the modern world and possessed this Miss Ning's body. Not only did she take over Miss Ning's identity and body, but she also took over the demon in her body. Moreover, she couldn't drive it out. This was really a sin. Speaking of which, who was that little lowly snow cloth talisman? Demon ancestor? Or a new demon born from the 3 types of demon aura? She hadn't come out for a long time. Was she really refined? Shinjioli used that pot of soup to cook her. Was it actually to refine the demon in her body? Was it successful? Ning Xuema closed her eyes and sensed her dantian again. She deliberately let her psychokinesis wander around her dantian a few times. In the end, there was no reaction. Her dantian seemed to have really become a dantian for absorbing qi, and not a hiding place for the little demon child. When she was cooked by Shinjioli, she hated him to the bone. If she had enough strength at that time, she would have fought to the death with him. Later on, although she didn't impulsively fight him to the death, she had subconsciously rejected him and wanted to completely cut off all ties with him. That was why she never thought about him. Even if she did, it was full of negative energy. She did not judge him based on his good intentions. No matter what he did, it seemed like he had ulterior motives in her eyes. The more you care about someone, the easier it is to be calculative, the easier it is to get into a dead end, and the easier it is to be hurt. If someone else had done this to her, she would have calmly investigated the truth. If he was doing this for her own good, she would laugh it off. At most, she would kick him a few times to take revenge for being boiled in the frying pan. If he was taking revenge on her, she would also use other methods to get back at him. She would repay kindness with kindness and revenge with revenge. Instead of curling up in a corner and tangling with himself like he was now. She was so conflicted, it was not like her at all. Ning Xuema used to think that she didn't have this bad habit, but now it seemed that this bad habit was not light. For example, even if she roughly guessed Shinjioli's real intention of boiling her, she still had a knot in her heart. This knot made her uncomfortable, and it was difficult for her to make a decision for a while. Chapter 1406. That way, even if she didn't hate him, she wouldn't be able to thank him. Moreover, there were still some other knots in her heart. For example, Shinjioli had slapped her onto a boulder for Wu Mo. For example, he had ignored her after raping her. For example, he had locked her in the ice purgatory and frozen her half to death. For example, he and Yunshi had gone to Lover's Island for 3 days. When they came back, they were still snuggled up to each other. For example, he had built a house for Yunshi on Tianyin Peak. She still remembered those days. She had been anxious, desperate, angry, from heaven to hell, from hope to despair. Moreover, the current Shinjioli only had Shui Mo's memories. He had long forgotten about his relationship with Ning Xuema. In his eyes, she was still a scheming bitch with ulterior motives. She had gotten close to him with ill intentions. What should I do? What should I do? She knew that she was still in love with him, but she also knew that she should look for him now and explain everything clearly to him. She should discuss everything openly and then decide whether to leave or stay. But, she didn't want to go yet. She didn't know how long she had been sitting on that boulder. It had been so long that she thought she had turned into space dust. Finally, she stood up. It was better to go find him. Let's talk first. Perhaps there were some misunderstandings. Even if they had to go their separate ways in the future, she didn't want to confusedly let it go. At the very least, she wanted him to know about the efforts that Shui Mo had put in to revive him. At the very least, she wanted to understand what had happened between him and Yunshi. Perhaps, her previous conjectures didn't match the real situation at all. More importantly, if he really didn't have any feelings for her and didn't care about her anymore, then he wouldn't have followed her in the Immortal Kingdom, right? He had almost killed Shui Lan. It was the first time she had seen him so angry and murderous. That domineering aura had scared her so much that her whole body had turned cold and her brain had almost crashed. It turned out that a god who was usually so indifferent could be so terrifying when he got angry. Was he jealous? The image of Shinjioli being stabbed by her flashed before her eyes. His heart jolted, as if someone had ruthlessly pinched it. A fire seemed to ignite in her chest, and this fire burned her mouth dry. No, she had to find him and make things clear right now. She had loved only him in both her past and present life. For him, she had even lived a life that was neither human nor ghost, nor demon. She had paid such a huge price, so there was no need to miss it just because of some misunderstanding. She pondered over the events of her past life and this life, and felt that she no longer owed him anything. However, he still owed her an explanation. He even owed her the truth. She was the one who had used a forbidden technique and paid such a heavy price to revive him. How could he give all the credit to someone else? She didn't want to be a silent Lei Feng anymore. So, he owed her. She was going to find him and make him pay for what he owed. Thinking of this, she didn't want to stop for a moment and immediately stood up. He looked around and was about to look for the spatial jump passage when he was suddenly stunned. She didn't know when the scenery around her had changed. Originally, she had been sitting on a large rock in a meteorite belt. On her left was a blue planet, and on her right was a red planet. Now, those two planets had disappeared, and the other galaxies she was once familiar with had also disappeared. Her surroundings were frighteningly unfamiliar, and she couldn't find a single familiar thing. Chapter 1407. She used to have coordinates when she jumped through the doors of time and space, so she wouldn't get lost. But now, all the coordinates were gone. It was as if she was lost in a black hole in the universe, and she couldn't find her way home. She stood there for a moment, and couldn't help but touch her forehead. Ning Xuemo, are you a pig? You can travel 80,000 miles in a day by sitting on the ground. You should know this when you were in primary school. All the planets move at high speed, and the speed and trajectory are the same. She had been in a daze here for so long, and the reference objects around her had changed. She looked up again and was puzzled. Logically speaking, it was normal for the reference objects around her to change, but the changes in the distant galaxies in the sky were also abnormal, right? What exactly happened? What had happened while she was in a daze? Ning Xuemo's ability to recognize directions had always been superb. Even if she was thrown into a desert without any coordinates, she could still walk out on her own. But now, she was in the middle of the universe, and in a place she was not familiar with at all. It would be difficult for her to find a place where humans lived, let alone go back. She calmed herself down, stood up hurriedly, and began to look for the doors of time and space. In the universe, every door of time and space was not in a fixed place, and they were constantly changing. Ordinary people would never be able to find them. They might bump into them by chance, and once they bumped into them, they might travel through time and space. In some science fiction novels, these doors of time and space were also called space doors. Alien intelligent beings drove flying saucers through these specific space doors to travel through time and distance to other planets. She had gone too far, and now she had to go back to the topic. When those immortal cultivators reached a certain level of cultivation, they could also sense the existence of the space doors, and they could travel through space freely, becoming immortals in the eyes of the world. As for Ning Xuemo, she hadn't reached the heavenly realm, and she wasn't considered an immortal yet. With her ability, she couldn't sense the space doors. The few times she jumped through the space doors, she was led by others. Shinjioli brought her here before, and he kept her in a wizardry barrier. Shuailan brought her here before, and they walked side by side. But now, she was the only one left here. If she wanted to escape from here, she could only rely on herself. Shui Lan was lost in thought for only a moment. When he collected his thoughts and looked up at Ning Xuemo again, he found that she had already left this barren planet, flew up, and disappeared into the clouds. He stared blankly for a moment before his expression suddenly changed. This planet was very strange. It was in the middle of spatial turbulence and was surrounded by spatial gates. If one blindly barged in, there was no telling where they would end up. When he entered other planets, he flew down from the sky, but when he appeared on this planet, he emerged directly from the sea. In other words, the spatial door leading to the place they were familiar with was in the sea and not in the sky. Momo. His figure rose and flew up as fast as lightning. He wanted to catch up with her, stop her, and bring her back to a familiar place. He knew that she didn't want to see him now, but he couldn't abandon her. However, Ning Xuemo's speed was too fast. He tried his best to catch up, but he couldn't catch up. He wanted to ask her to stop, but because his heart was in a mess, he couldn't. If he called her now, he was afraid that she would ignore him. It would be boring, and she might even run faster. So he had to catch up with her first. Both of them were as fast as shooting stars. Adding a chapter to beg for monthly votes. Chapter 1408. The two of them were like shooting stars chasing after the moon. In the end, Shui Lan's martial arts were a little higher. When he saw that he was about to catch up, he mustered up his courage and was about to speak when he suddenly realized that the space around Ning Xuemo had suddenly started to distort. The originally blue sky suddenly became dark and a big hole appeared. However, Ning Xuemo did not notice it at all. Her figure directly entered the deep black hole and disappeared. Momo. Shui Lan shouted. He steeled his heart and also flew towards the deep black hole. However, the big hole appeared suddenly and disappeared suddenly. Before he could reach it, the deep black hole disappeared and the sky returned to normal as if nothing had happened. Shui Lan's heart almost sank to the bottom of the earth. He often traveled through spatial doors, so naturally, he had heard of this kind of deep black hole. This kind of deep black hole was also called the land of death and dissolution. It was an extremely strange place. Any cultivator or devil that accidentally entered it would disappear and never appear again. No one knew what was inside this deep black hole, and no one knew what kind of accidents would happen to those who accidentally entered it. Whether it was the immortal realm, the devil realm, or the demon realm, they all set this place as the #1 forbidden area and avoided it like the plague. Who would have thought that Ning Xuemo would accidentally enter it? Shui Lan was about to go crazy. He circled around in the air, trying to find the deep black hole and then rush in to save her. Even if he rushed in and could not come out, it was still better than her being alone in there, 1 day, 2 days. Or 1 month, 2 months. Ning Xuemo did not know how long she had been in this strange place, nor did she know how long she had been flying. In here, time seemed to have stopped and there was no distinction between day and night. It was as if she had become the dust of the universe and everything was out of her control. With her current skills, although it was not easy for her to sense spatial doors, her sixth sense was very strong. Moreover, she had traveled through time and space with those two for so long. She was quite clear about spatial doors and knew where they usually existed. But now, she had been searching for so long, but she still couldn't find any trace of the space door. Cultivators who breathed in these places relied on the conversion of the psychokinesis in their bodies. In other words, flying here consumed her psychokinesis very quickly. Once the psychokinesis in her body was exhausted, she would be unable to breathe and would suffocate to death. They would truly become ignorant cosmic dust. If they died like this, their souls would truly scatter, and they wouldn't even be able to reincarnate. 4/5 of the psychokinesis in her body had been consumed. Her flying speed slowed down, and her body began to feel uncomfortable. Her brain also became a little dizzy because of the lack of oxygen. At this rate, if she still couldn't find the spatial door in 6 to 8 hours, she would be able to rest in peace in space. Despair filled her heart as she sighed inwardly. Was she and the Almighty destined to be together forever? She had finally untied the knot in her heart and made up her mind to look for him. She had not expected to encounter such a situation. If she died here silently, she was afraid that no one would know. Of course, Shinjiuli would not know. He would probably think that she and Shuailan had been traveling through space for fun. Even if they hadn't seen each other for 300 to 500 years, he would not think that she had met with an accident. Her chest became more and more stuffy, and her eyes began to blur. Chapter 1409. She smiled bitterly. She didn't expect that after fighting for so long, she would end up like this. Shinjiuli, you and I are not fated to be together. I can't repay what I owe you. You don't know what you owe me. After another 900 years, you will completely forget about my existence. Shinjiuli, I'm suddenly envious of your ability to sleep for 900 years and forget everything after 10 years. Be it happiness or disappointment, everything will be gone when you wake up. She was so dizzy that she didn't know if she was going to continue flying or just float in space. When the darkness came again, she closed her eyes and was about to accept her fate. Suddenly, her stomach moved, as if a small hand was scratching it. The feeling was so strong that Ning Xuemo's brain, which was on the verge of fainting, started to work again. She felt that there was a breath in her stomach, circulating quickly in her body. She didn't need to breathe or feel suffocated. What was going on? Could it be that the magic loli in her body hadn't disappeared and didn't want to die with her, so it gave her another push? Ning Xuemo instinctively looked at her energy center. There was nothing wrong with it. It was just like any other time. She was stunned for a moment. She closed her eyes again and looked at the place where her stomach moved. She finally realized that it was her uterus. There seemed to be a living thing in her uterus. Ning Xuemo's heart started to race. She knew what it meant to have a living thing in her uterus. She couldn't believe it. She and the Almighty had only slept together once. Did she hit the jackpot? But now, it had been more than 3 months since that rolling in the sheets. Then, it had exploded and reassembled in the purgatory of ice, and it had been boiled in the copper cauldron again and again. With all this torment, even if she was pregnant with the iron baby at that time, it would have been destroyed, right? Moreover, there would be pregnancy symptoms like morning sickness after pregnancy. However, she didn't feel any discomfort and her stomach was still flat. As for her period, it seemed like she had never been normal ever since she started. Once every 3 months, once every 2 months, it was very common. There was even one time when it came after half a year. That was why she had never noticed the changes in her menstrual cycle. Now that she thought about it, after she had slept with Shinjiuli, her period had never come. Was she really pregnant? She focused all her energy and looked into her womb. She could faintly see that there was indeed a small person inside. It was similar to the image seen with the ultrasound. He could barely make out the head and tail. It really was an embryo. She was really pregnant. At this moment, she felt all the blood in her body rushing to her head, and all her energy returned. She couldn't die. She was no longer alone, but 2 people. For the sake of the baby in her womb, she had to live on. She gently stroked her lower abdomen with her fingers. As if telepathic, there was a slight movement there, as if a small foot had kicked it. Ning Xuemo felt warmth in her chest, and hot tears instantly filled her eyes. She took a deep breath and gently rubbed it. Baby, I'll definitely take you away from here. I must show you this world. Your father still doesn't know of your existence, so I have to let you see him. Her lower abdomen bulged slightly again, as if the little guy in her womb was sticking out his little butt. Ning Xuema couldn't help but smile, but her eyes were inexplicably sore. For the sake of the child, she would do anything. Chapter 14:10. However, what made her feel a little strange was that normal children would only have fetal movements after 4 or 5 months of gestation, but her baby was only 3 months old at most. Unexpectedly, it was so lively that it had fetal movements at this time to remind her of its existence. Perhaps people in this era were developing ahead of their time. Moreover, its father was a god, and she was about to reach the heavenly realm and become a celestial. It was not too strange for her child to develop like this. As if she had been injected with chicken blood, she began to look for the space door again. Perhaps it was not her time to die, or perhaps it was the blessing brought by the baby in her belly. After about an hour, she finally sent some information about the space door. Although she did not know where this space door led to, it was still a hope. It was better than waiting for death here, so Ning Xuema desperately rushed over. The blue light in front of her suddenly flashed, and she fell into a big whirlpool with countless shards. All kinds of scenery, all kinds of people, all kinds of buildings. Like a whirlwind, they whizzed past in front of her. There was a hurricane in the whirlpool, and the hurricane swept her around and pulled her. She felt that she was going to be torn apart, and the pain was unbearable. She subconsciously hugged her belly to protect it. Her baby was hard to come by, and she could not let anything happen to it in here. She did not know how long she had been in the whirlpool. Perhaps it was a quarter of an hour, or perhaps it was just a short moment. Finally, she came out of the whirlpool, and the blue sky and white clouds appeared in front of her. Blue sky and white clouds. She actually saw the blue sky and white clouds. And she fell between the blue sky and white clouds. She did not have time to think, and immediately used her psychokinesis to stabilize her body in the air. The wind blew in her face, and it was cool and pleasant. There was a familiar smell in the air. It was the smell that belonged to the air of her era. She was stunned, and subconsciously looked down, and her body froze. She was now 5,000 or 6,000 meters in the air. Looking down, she saw buildings that were smaller than matchboxes, and they were arranged in an orderly manner below. The river of cars meandered, and the lights were flashing brighter than the stars in the sky. She was stunned, and her eyes widened in disbelief. This was the place she had dreamed of, her own era. She had returned to her own era. Her legs suddenly became weak, and she almost could not stand in the air. Boom! A huge rumbling sound suddenly came from far below. She looked in the direction of the sound. Her eyesight was amazing now, so she could naturally see very far away. She saw a Boeing plane flying up from below. Ning Xuema could even see the person inside the plane through the small window. She saw a 5 or 6-year-old child with his face pressed against the window, looking at her in shock. His little mouth was wide open. Oh no! If the people on the plane saw her floating in the air, it would be another big news. Ning Xuema immediately hid her figure. Her ears were sharp, and she actually heard the child shouting, "Fairy sister! Fairy sister! Look, there's a fairy sister over there." A few faces were also pasted on the other windows. There were old and young, male and female faces, but because Ning Xuema had hidden herself, they couldn't see anything. The child's parents also looked in the direction of Ning Xuema, and naturally, they didn't see anything. Naturally, no one would take the words of a 6 or 7-year-old child seriously. The child's mother hugged the child, but she didn't expose the child's lie. She kissed the child's forehead and said, "Baby is an angel, so he can see fairy sister." Chapter 14:11. Her gentle tone made the child very happy. She also kissed her mother on the cheek. The scene of mother and daughter snuggling together was very heartwarming. Ning Xuemo didn't know how many similar scenes she had seen in the past. Originally, she didn't feel anything, but now, she felt warmth in her heart. She couldn't help but stroke her lower abdomen. She was also pregnant with a baby. A few months later, she would be born too. She seemed to have seen the day of the baby's birth. She could not help but smile again. Before she transmigrated, she advocated the idea of being single. She felt that it was good to be alone, free as the wind. She was not tied down by anyone or anything. Now, she had an extra sweet burden. She just needed to find her child's father and reunite with her family. However, she had returned to this world. How was she going to leave? The doors of time and space here seemed to be different from those of other places. Ning Xuemo originally wanted to fly around in the sky and look for other doors of time and space. Later, she thought that since it was rare for her to return to her own world, she might as well visit her friends. She was actually very curious about how her friends dealt with her when she fell asleep and could not wake up. Was her body still alive in the modern world? With these questions in mind, she quickly determined the coordinates of her location and then flew towards her old home. Her old home was a rather picturesque residential area. Naturally, she saw many familiar things along the way. The city's neon lights were twinkling, the river of cars that flowed like stars, the bright street lights, the city street gardens, and the crowds of people dressed up in various colors wandering in the night. Everything was so familiar that it made her heart palpitate. She never knew that she could be so homesick. She could not tell if she was sad or happy when she returned to her hometown. There were all kinds of feelings in her heart. She was not in a hurry to go home. Instead, she strolled along the streets, looking at the lights, the buildings, and the people. After she had seen enough, she slowly returned to her home. The residential area was still the same residential area. Even the security guards were still the same. Nothing had changed. It was as if she had never left. She had already looked at the calendar. It had only been a year since she transmigrated. A year's time was nothing to most people. However, to Ning Xuemo, it felt like a century. She felt that she was already out of touch with this society. She didn't want to reveal herself, so she went back into her unit. The door was locked. The decoration of the door was the same, but the lock had been changed. Her heart sank. She turned invisible and opened the door. Then, she stood there, unable to describe her feelings. Nothing in the house had changed. Her furniture, her dolls, everything was still there. Even the aquarium-like water wall by the door was still there. The map fish were still swimming happily in the tank. The house was very clean, as if she was still living here and had never left. She walked into the bedroom and looked at her big bed. The bed was still there. She clearly remembered that she had bought this bed before she had transmigrated. She liked the bed's antique texture and color, so she had bought it at a high price. However, he didn't expect that he would transmigrate after sleeping on it for one night. The bed was still there, and even the bedding was the one she used to sleep on. It was neatly folded, and naturally, her body was not on it. Chapter 14:12. Ning Xuemo heaved a sigh of relief. She thought that she could see her sleeping beauty in this room. Perhaps she was already dead in this world. Otherwise, it was impossible for the owner to change. She walked around the room and found other girls' clothes, shoes, hats, cosmetics, skincare products, and other sundries. Obviously, the current owner of this place was also a girl. Ning Xuemo slowly sat on the sofa and looked at everything here. She was lost in thought for a moment. The door was locked, and the door was opened again. A pretty girl dressed casually and looked lazy walked in. She looked to be about 20 years old and looked unfamiliar. Ning Xuema did not know her. The girl was shocked when she came in. Then, her eyes fell on the sofa and she pursed her lips. Who's there? Ning Xuema was a little surprised. She was invisible. How could the girl see her? The girl took 2 steps forward and stood less than 4 feet in front of Ning Xuema. Show yourself. I know you're a girl like me. Are you the original owner? Ning Xuema raised her eyebrows and showed herself. How did you guess? The girl took a step back and her bright eyes looked at Ning Xuema. It's really the original owner. You're even prettier than the photo. Did you die unjustly? Do you have something on your mind this time? It turned out that she thought she was a ghost. She could talk to her calmly as a ghost. This girl was not simple. Ning Xuema talked with her for a while and figured out the girl's background. Her name was Bai Yun. She was a top student from the Academy of Medical Sciences. She had just graduated with a doctorate in forensic science. From Bai Yun's mouth, Ning Xuema found out what had happened to her after she transmigrated. A year ago, she had died in her bed. At that time, it had caused quite an uproar. If it weren't for her friend who stopped them, her corpse would have been taken to the forensic laboratory for an autopsy. Bai Yun happened to pass by the place when she was looking for a house. It was rare for her to join in the fun. She went forward and saw that she died of sudden cardiac death. You have a lot of friends. A lot of people came that day. They were all sad and crying. Bai Yun summed up the situation at that time. Where's my corpse? Ning Xuema had a strange feeling. In just a few days, she actually saw herself die twice. In the previous life, Shui Emo, in this life, Ning Xuema. Your friend carried you into the helicopter and took you away. The young man who flew the helicopter cried the loudest. He carried you up directly and didn't let anyone touch you. He looked like he was going to fight anyone who touched you. Ning Xuema was speechless. She had already guessed who had taken her body. It was her most loyal subordinate, a baby-faced sharpshooter who was also a mechanical genius. He was somewhat arrogant and had once brazenly chased after her. Even after being cut by her a few times, he was still unyielding. Ning Xuema's deepest impression of him was when he confessed to her while flying a helicopter at sea. He said that if she didn't agree, he would take her into the sea and commit suicide with her. Before he could finish his threat, Ning Xuema directly kicked him down and made him take a bath. That guy had a kind of obsession with her. After she died, would her body be taken away by him as a specimen and put at home? With that guy's nature, he would definitely do it. However, her other subordinates wouldn't agree, right? Ning Xuema was not sure. Chapter 14:13. Ning Xuema looked at Bai Yun from head to toe. You know that the owner of this house died suddenly. How dare you come and live here? Did they sell this house to you? Bai Yun smiled. I'm not afraid of ghosts. Besides, your house is cheap. I'm poor. Your friend rented it to me. His only request is that he doesn't change anything in this house. You're not just a forensic doctor, are you? Ning Xuema looked at her. Bai Yun thought for a while and handed her a business card. This is my second profession. If you need anything, please take care of me. Ning Xuema looked at the business card and finally knew her second identity. She was an exorcist from the Bai clan. No wonder she was so bold and not afraid of ghosts. She knew that the Bai clan was on par with the Yi clan of exorcists. The difference was that the Yi clan only accepted disciples with different surnames, while the Bai clan only passed it down to females. Ning Xuema crossed her arms and looked at her. Do you think I'm a ghost? Bai Yun shook her head. No, but you're not a real person. Your aura is very similar to my friend's. Did you travel through time? Soul travel? Ning Xuema was speechless. Was traveling through time as common as eating cabbage these days? Bai Yun probably read the curiosity in Ning Xuema's eyes. She smiled. Don't be surprised. I have a few friends who can travel through time and space freely. So, they're more familiar with this. Ning Xuema's heart skipped a beat. Travel through time and space freely. Did that mean she didn't need to look for the space door and could travel back directly? She chatted with Bai Yun for a while. She learned from Bai Yun that her friends who could travel through time and space freely relied on something called the reincarnation disc. Although her era was good, Ning Xuema was anxious to go home. She still had to find the Almighty. She was afraid that something would happen if she was late. Ning Xuema didn't want to beat around the bush. She immediately expressed her interest in the reincarnation disc and hoped to buy one. Bai Yun was also a straightforward person. He nodded and agreed, saying that he would contact them for her. It was easy for girls to become friends. As a former agent, Ning Xuema had a good impression of this girl named Bai Yun even though she was more cautious. Subconsciously, she felt that she could be friends with her. Her sixth sense had never been wrong, so after chatting for a while, the two of them became friends. Half an hour later, the two of them sat at the dining table and started eating supper. The takeout that Bai Yun ordered was very delicious. Coincidentally, it also suited Ning Xuema's taste. She hadn't eaten anything from this era for a long time. Now that she was eating it again and tasting that familiar taste, she had an illusion that it was a lifetime ago. Bai Yun opened a bottle of red wine and was about to pour it for her. Ning Xuema waved her hand. I can't drink now. Bai Yun's eyes lit up. Are you pregnant? This little girl was really extraordinarily smart. Ning Xuema nodded. Bai Yun's eyes were even brighter. You want to travel back so urgently because you can't bear to leave the child's father. Ning Xuema smiled and didn't avoid it. Yes, I can't leave him. Then how did you travel back? Does your husband know? Ning Xuema paused and shook her head. It was a coincidence that I traveled back. He doesn't know. Oh, then he will probably go crazy looking for you. Bai Yun took a sip of wine and wrung her hands. Ning Xuema smiled and didn't say anything. She felt a little bitter in her heart. Would Shinjuli look for her? Probably, no way. Chapter 14:14. The two of them chatted for a while. At night, Ning Xuema stayed here. After all, it used to be her house, so she slept soundly. Bai Yun smiled and said, I didn't touch anything in your house, and I didn't dare to sleep on the big bed. I've been sleeping in the guest room next door. If you need anything, just call me. Ning Xuema naturally agreed, and the two of them went to sleep. Outside, the sky was full of stars. Ning Xuema lay on the big bed. She was obviously very tired, but she didn't feel sleepy at all. After tossing and turning for a while, she placed her hands on her stomach and sighed softly. Baby, maybe I can bring you to see him tomorrow. I wonder how he will react when he finds out about your existence. She thought about Shinjuli's possible reaction and realized that she couldn't think of anything. She sighed again, hugged the blanket, and rolled around. She continued to talk to the baby in her stomach. I don't know if he will believe my explanation. Damn it, dealing with people who have lost their memories is really troublesome. Oh, right, he has the ability to read people's memories. When the time comes, I'll let him read it. Maybe everything will be solved. Thinking of this, Ning Xuema heaved a sigh of relief. She pursed her lips and felt a little wronged. Actually, he has let me down. After everything is explained, I'll make him beg me to stay. If he continues to be arrogant, I'll ignore him. Baby, I'll take you far away. Her stomach moved again, as if the baby in her stomach was echoing her. Ning Xuema was in a good mood. She rubbed her stomach gently. Baby, you're really mommy's considerate little jacket. Are you a boy or a girl? She thought for a while and simply used her inner vision to check the baby in her stomach. After a while, she gave up. The baby in her stomach was too small, and she couldn't tell if it was a boy or a girl. However, since it was so considerate, it should be a girl, right? She thought for a while, but she still couldn't get sleepy. She looked up at her watch. It was almost midnight. A pregnant person couldn't stay up late. Otherwise, it would be bad for the baby in her stomach. Yes, she needed to sleep. The baby would only be healthy if she had enough sleep. She closed her eyes, emptied her mind, and began to cultivate sleep. After all, she had practiced meditation before, so it wasn't too difficult to cultivate her sleepiness. An hour later, she finally succeeded in waking up and shaking hands with him. Before she fell asleep, she vaguely wondered if she would be able to dream about him this time. The green grass stretched as far as the eye could see, the mountains and rivers were beautiful, and the trees towered into the sky. Clouds and mist constantly swirled around their feet, making it seem like a paradise for immortals. Ning Xuema stood on the grass in a daze. Where was this place? She couldn't help but walk forward. There were all kinds of foxes in the clouds. Some were white, some were red, and some were green. Some had 6 tails, and some had 8 tails. It was very beautiful. Had he fallen into a fox's den? So many foxes. Ning Xuema browsed the scenery as she walked. Suddenly, there was a clear voice in front of her. Aya, there's someone here. After this call, the big and small foxes that were laughing and chasing each other on the grass suddenly changed into their human forms. There were men and women, young and old, and all of them were very beautiful. Where is it? Where is it? What kind of person is it? They all laughed and ran towards the place where the voice came from. It turned out that these foxes had all cultivated into human forms. Did he end up in a Chinese studio? There were so many fox spirits. Ning Xuema thought for a while and ran over. Chapter 14-15. In front of her, men and women were gathered in a circle, chattering away. It was very lively. Ah, it's a man. He's so beautiful. Yes, he's even more beautiful than the most beautiful Injochin here. Hey, he's injured. There's a lot of blood on his robe. Ning Xuema's heart skipped a beat. Since no one here could see her, she simply squeezed into the crowd to take a look. She finally saw the injured man who was surrounded by the crowd. Her whole body froze there. Shinjioli. The person lying there with his eyes closed was actually Shinjioli. His face was a little pale, and there were bloodstains on the bottom of his snow-white robe. It was obvious that he was seriously injured. He had already fainted, so he didn't know that he was surrounded by a group of vixens. Ning Xuema stared at the bloodstains on his white robe. She couldn't wait to lift up his robe to take a look and see how serious his injury was. The injury seemed to be on his abdomen. Could it be because she had stabbed him with the knife? Ning Xuema's hands and feet were a little cold. She steeled her heart and rushed over to his side. She raised her hand to touch the wound under his white robe, but her fingers brushed past his body. She could see him, but she couldn't touch him. She was very anxious and raised her hand again. Before she could touch his robe, she suddenly heard someone shout, "Oh, he's awake." Ning Xuema's hand trembled. She couldn't help but raise her head to look at his face. Sure enough, she saw his eyelashes tremble slightly, and he slowly opened his eyes. That pair of deep blue eyes were like the sea, and they met with Ning Xuemo's eyes. Ning Xuemo's heart was beating like thunder. She opened her mouth, but found that she couldn't make a sound. She was anxious. Everything in front of her dissipated, and she woke up from her dream. She raised her hand to touch her forehead. Her forehead was full of sweat, and the blanket was a little thick. She sat up, and her heart was still beating fast. She actually dreamed of him, and she even dreamed that he was seriously injured. Some people said that dreams were the result of overthinking. She probably had some lingering thoughts after stabbing him with the knife, which was why she dreamed of this. It couldn't be real. With Shinjuli's great ability, he didn't even stab him in the vital parts. With his ability, it would be a matter of minutes for him to recover. He would never be in such a sorry state. Moreover, even if he was injured, he was in the immortal nation. How could he fall into the fox's den? A dream. It was indeed a dream. She was probably afraid that he would be seduced by the vixen, and she felt guilty about stabbing him with the knife. Under the influence of these two factors, she had such a dream. Although she thought so, she still couldn't let it go. Her heart was burning, and she couldn't wait to rush to Tianyin Peak. Ning Xuemo thought that as long as she got the samsara disc, it would be easy to travel back. She didn't expect that things were far from as simple as she thought. Bai Yun had indeed brought her the wheel of samsara. Not only had he brought her the wheel of samsara, but he had also brought along a renowned exorcist. It was said that he was a fox immortal who had traveled through countless spacetime. He had a slightly feminine name, Hua Baoyue. This exorcist was extremely beautiful, so beautiful that one couldn't tell his gender. He looked flamboyant, and his personality was also flamboyant. The moment he entered, his pair of watery peach blossom eyes fell on Ning Xuemo. He looked her up and down. Little girl, are you the one who wants to travel through spacetime? You want the wheel of samsara. Ning Xuemo. If Bai Yun hadn't introduced him in advance, Ning Xuemo would have thought that this exorcist, Hua Baoyue, was a charlatan who sold wild herbs. Chapter 14:16. Ning Xuemo nodded and answered simply, yes, I want to travel back to that era. Hua Baoyue smiled brightly and sat down on the sofa. Come, tell me, which era do you want to travel to? How many years from now? It's best to confirm the month and day so that it can be accurate. Ning Xuemo was speechless. She couldn't say it. The world she traveled to wasn't any era in history. She didn't even know if that era was before or after this one, let alone what year it was. Hua Baoyue looked at her expression and seemed to understand something. It's not in history. Ning Xuemo nodded. Ah. Hua Baoyue frowned slightly. It doesn't matter. Let me ask you, what was the color of the whirlpool before you traveled? I can estimate the general age based on the color of the whirlpool. There shouldn't be a difference of 2 or 3 years. Ning Xuemo was confused. What whirlpool? I was sleeping and my soul traveled. When I woke up, I was in that era. Hua Baoyue was speechless. He coughed, so it's soul transmigration. This is a little troublesome, and the cost should be higher. He turned to ask Bai Yun, little Bai, have you negotiated the price with her? Bai Yun said, no, she's the original owner of this house. Brother Hua, I hit it off with her the moment I met her. Please help her this time. Hua Baoyue looked at the layout of the house and then at Ning Xuemo. So you're the lady who suddenly died in this house. Well, since Xiao Bai is living here and the rent is cheap, I'll give you a discount. After it's done, you can mortgage this house to me as payment. Ning Xuemo was speechless. Was this guy not a fraud? He said it so casually. Her house was 180 square meters in a high-end neighborhood. The average price was 200,000 yuan per square meter. He was still considered cheap for a property worth tens of millions. Was this guy sure he had a reincarnation disc? Was he just making a trap to trick her into giving up her house? What kind of person was Hua Baoyue? He was a master. With just a glance from Ning Xuemo, he could guess what she was thinking. He smiled and took out a black compass from his pocket. He weighed it in his palm and said, I, Hua Baoyue, have always been honest when doing business. The cost of making the samsara disc was high, and it consumed a lot of spiritual power. Each side was sold for at least 50 million yuan, and that was in the famous era in history. I sold the highest one for 100 million and sent it straight to the Jurassic period. Ning Xuemo's lips twitched. Are you a transmigrator? There were so many rich people now. If there really was such a company, there would definitely be many people who would want to spend a lot of money to try it out. Would the sky of history be pierced into a sieve? Would there be as many transmigrators as dumplings? Hua Baoyue smiled and said, my reincarnation will only reincarnates those who are fated. It's not just about money. He still had to follow the rules of history. Otherwise, wouldn't it be a mess? Hua Baoyue's smile was like a flower blooming in spring. It could almost dazzle people's eyes. Two words instantly appeared in Ning Xuemo's mind, evildoer. She didn't expect that there would be such a handsome man in her era. He was almost as handsome as Shinjiuli. Thinking of this name, she felt warm and sour in her heart. She took a deep breath. She just wanted to go back and tell Shinjiuli everything. Chapter 14-17. She no longer cared about the houses of this era. She only suspected that Hua Baoyue had the means to do so. Ning Xuemo looked at the reincarnation disc in Hua Baoyue's hand and felt the spiritual power surging in it. She talked with Hua Baoyue for a while. Hua Baoyue was eloquent and answered every question. Ning Xuemo was also a negotiator. After a while, Ning Xuemo was finally sure that what Hua Baoyue said was true. In order to go back, she took the risk. Hua Baoyue was obviously well prepared. She even brought the contract. Both parties agreed that if Hua Baoyue achieved Ning Xuemo's goal, the house would belong to Hua Baoyue after a month. On the other hand, not only would Hua Baoyue not get the house, but she would also have to pay Ning Xuemo 30 million yuan. Ning Xuemo had her own plans. If she successfully transmigrated, she would not come back. The contract would take effect. If she did not succeed, she could go back on her words. This contract was indeed fair and honest to both the old and the young. And Bai Yun was the witness of their contract. After both parties had reached an agreement, Hua Baoyue smiled and looked at Ning Xuemo. Is this your body after you transmigrated? Ning Xuemo nodded. How is it different from your original body? We look the same. Only the age is different. Ning Xuemo explained the situation of her cultivation in the other world. Hua Baoyue's eyes moved slightly. She stood up and walked around her. After a moment of silence, she suddenly said, this body is actually yours. Ning Xuemo asked, how do you know? Your aura is very compatible with this body. It doesn't look like it can be possessed. Only your original body can achieve such a level of compatibility. But I was possessed. This body was only 13 years old. It was short and skinny. Ning Xuemo obviously did not believe her. Hua Baoyue shook her head. I don't know exactly what happened. It seems like someone changed your body for you over there. Maybe you were someone else's body when you crossed over, but you weren't. Ning Xuema was stunned. She remembered that she had taken a bath in Han Shanyue's celestial master residence and had grown several years older. Could it be that Shinjiuli's hot spring had this function? Hua Baoyue knocked on the table with a serious face. Come, tell me about that era, the customs, the people, the clothes, the habits. The more detailed, the better. This will make it easier for me to make the right judgment. This was not a problem for Ning Xuemo. Besides, there was nothing to hide. She had done a lot of homework there and knew the local customs and customs of that continent like the back of her hand, so she told him about it. Of course, she mainly talked about the shape of the continent, its structure, the layout of the country, and so on. She rarely talked about personal matters. The more Hua Baoyue listened, the more his brows furrowed. When Ning Xuemo finished, he sat there and pondered for a long time. Ning Xuemo did not understand Hua Baoyue's personality, but Bai Yun did. She finally interrupted, "Brother Hua, what's the problem?" Hua Baoyue sighed slightly and looked at Ning Xuemo again. "Your crossing over is a bit unreliable." Ning Xuemo did not speak. She listened to his explanation with Bai Yun. When Hua Baoyue finished, not only was Bai Yun stunned, but even Ning Xuemo felt like she had been struck by lightning. It was just as Hua Baoyue had suspected. Her crossing over was very strange.